Hello, this is Bad Vibes. Today's video is featuring a lot of up-and-coming narrators. Please sub if you enjoy their narrations and help them out a bit. Their channel links with timestamps will be in the description. Also, I did a video just like this last year. I'll also link that in the description. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. To preface this, I live in an apartment block where there's a ground floor apartment and a first floor apartment. Each apartment has its own front door that faces the courtyard area. The apartments are more like large houses that have been split into 2 bedrooms, 1 bath units, with a large opening for the kitchen living room area. I live on the ground floor. The apartments are surrounded on each side by alleyways, and there are large gates which used to have coded padlocks on them, which do not work anymore. I tried to get the property management company out to fix them on multiple occasions with no luck. This means the gates are effectively left open for everyone and anyone to gain access to the front doors from 2 busy streets. Last night at approximately 2:30 a.m., my doorbell rang. I woke up from a deep sleep, and without thinking to check my phone, I quickly wrapped a blanket around myself and went to open the door. I assumed it could have been my sister or a family member who was unable to contact me and arrived due to an emergency. I was wrong. I looked through the frosted glass on the door and could see a light shining through. I opened the door and there's a man standing there whom I have never seen before and knew was not a resident of the block of apartments. He was wearing a headlamp and asked me to open the bin storage for him, which is a shared space only accessible to residents through calling a phone number to unlock it. All the residents have access, so it was even more obvious that he didn't live there. It generally frightened me to have a stranger standing at my door at 2:30 a.m. asking me for access to the bin storage for reasons I didn't find out. I was too scared to actually ask for any information or what he was putting in the bins. I can't see the bin storage from my front door, so I couldn't actually see if he had bags to put out there or what he was disposing of. I was pretty much frozen on the spot, holding the door tightly and not opening it more than a few inches. I blindly accepted his request to open the bins as I couldn't physically bring myself to decline. I told him it was open for him, swiftly locked the door, and pushed my 15 kg kettlebell against it. My mind was absolutely racing and my anxiety hit the roof. I was physically shaking and could barely string a sentence together as I tried to explain to my partner what had just happened when I got back into bed. We got up together to sit in the living room for a cup of tea to try to settle my nerves. We stayed up for about an hour and a half, talking through what happened and trying to explain it or come up with scenarios that made the ordeal make more sense in a positive light, given that all the ideas in my mind were darkly negative. I don't know if he was scoping out the place to break in. He knows there's an adult female living in one of the apartments, presumably alone, as he didn't see anyone else when I opened the door. About an hour after the incident, my partner went outside to check the bin storage. The door had been left open, indicating that someone had in fact been in there. He didn't notice anything suspicious or out of place, and came back inside. We stayed up until the paranoia began to subside and exhaustion took over. I eventually had myself convinced that if it had been 10:30 p.m. or 6:30 a.m., it wouldn't have been nearly as suspect as 2:30 a.m. So I was trying to picture the scenario as though it was a normal time. What won't go away though is the way the man greeted me when I opened the door. Through the gap, the first words I heard were, "Hello, love." It still freaks the fuck out of me hours later.
When I was around 12 or 13, my sister and I came across a game when we visited my cousins in Mexico. It's basically a game that connects you to the other side and you can communicate with a good or bad spirit. It's called the Red Book game. I had no idea what I was getting myself into, so I decided to play. It was a very freaky experience. I believe whatever spirit we were communicating with attached to us in a negative way. Fast forward, we went back home after a week in Mexico and it was summertime. I used to stay up late with my sister Jess and cousin Betty until 2 or 3 in the morning, playing board games or watching TV. One particular night, we were playing a game and it was about 2 in the morning. We heard a slight knock on the door. I went to go open it and there was no one there. We thought it was our youngest sister Ash playing a prank on us, so we didn't think anything of it. A couple of minutes later, we heard 3 knocks, but this time it was louder. I went to go open it again and no one was there. At this point, we were afraid and debating on who should go downstairs to check if it was really my sister pranking us. As we were talking, again, 3 knocks. I quickly opened the door and no one was there. We all decided to go downstairs to check if anyone was awake. My parents were asleep. My grandma was asleep. And my little sister was also asleep. We ran back upstairs because we were horrified. As we were talking about the knock, we heard a large slam coming from downstairs. We had no idea what it was. Betty and Jess made me go check, of course, because I was the youngest. And it was our chimney protector that had flung across the room. My dad came out mad because he had work the next morning. He inspected the area to see what could have caused the fall. He was surprised because it is a pretty large and heavy object. He didn't believe it fell by itself and made us go to sleep. That was my first paranormal experience of many. Now, this story I'm about to tell is my most creepiest and worst experience I had. After my first paranormal experience, odd things would happen, such as random things missing that I had just put down, things falling off the counter, frequent arguments and fights between my sisters and I, as if there was a really negative energy present in the house. I always felt like I was being watched. I never slept with the lights off because I felt like I was not alone. One particular summer night, Jess, Betty and I were watching a show. Jess and Betty were sitting on one sofa facing the TV, and I was sitting on the single chair sofa. We heard a sudden growl. It sounded like a wild pig coming from our backyard. We did not live in a ranch. We lived in the city, so we found that really strange. Jess paused the TV to see if we could hear it again, but there was no growl. We opened the window to see if maybe it was a stray dog, but there was nothing. We all sat back down to continue watching the show when I felt a sudden hair pull. It was so aggressive, my neck snapped back and hit the staircase. I shouted in anger because I thought it was my little sister messing with me. When I turned around, I saw a little human with straight black hair, straight bangs, pale skin and a faint smile. I quickly turned back around and jumped all the way to the sofa with Betty and Jess. I don't know how I jumped 5 feet from one sofa to the next, but I did after I saw that shit. My sister Jess sat there in horror, shocked at what she saw, and we all ran upstairs to the room. Betty did not know what was going on because she was watching the TV, but Jess claimed she saw when my hair was pulled. Of course, I did not want to sleep alone that night, so all 3 of us tried to sleep in a twin bed. Jess was charging her phone, and her charger has a bright blue light, so it was lighting up the room. I couldn't go to sleep, so I was staring at the walls of the room. In the corner of my eye, I saw something moving. I glanced, and I noticed the drawer was slowly opening. I kicked Jess and Betty so they can wake up, and I told them the drawers were opening. We all laid there in horror, watching the drawers opening one by one. We hid under the covers and planned to make a run for it. I got the nerve to get up and run towards the door. The door was stuck, it wouldn't open. We were all crying in horror, trying to get out, and Betty forced the door open after what seemed like forever. My parents came out of their room, and we couldn't even talk to tell them what happened. After we explained to my parents about the drawers opening, we went with my dad to show him. The drawers were all open. They were all opened in an even manner. He made us go to church and get blessed the next day, and the priest also came over to bless the house. After the house was blessed, paranormal activity was still occurring. We were seeing black shadow figures run from one room to the next. We were hearing noises of someone running from one place to the next. When we were downstairs, we would hear someone jumping on the bed upstairs when we knew no one was there. I feel like this entity would mostly pick on my sister and I. My parents would see weird things happen, but they wouldn't tell us because they didn't want to frighten us. One particular night, I was laying on the sofa watching a movie with my sister Jess. It wasn't too late because my parents were still awake in their room. Our living room is attached to the kitchen, so I was laying on the sofa facing the staircase, and Jess was laying on the other sofa, facing directly towards the TV. After the movie finished, the credits came on, so it was pretty dark in the living room. The hallway light was on, so I could still see the glare in the kitchen. We were too lazy to get up and get the remote to change the TV, so we were just talking. We then got interrupted by sudden laughter. It sounded just like my mum's laugh, as if the entity was mocking her sound. My mum has the habit of scaring us all the time since we would stay up really late, so we thought it was her. "Stop scaring us, Mum, we know it's you." Silence. No response. "Mum, is that you?" Still no response. My sister Jess and I were debating on who should get up and turn the lights on. We were too afraid since the living room was so dark and the light switches were located by the kitchen, so it was a walking distance to get there. I got the courage to get up and turn them on. As I was walking towards the light switch, I saw a black figure, definitely a woman, standing in the corner of the kitchen. You could see that she had a black veil over her face and was wearing a big black laced dress. She had a smile on her face as if she was laughing or giggling. I quickly looked away and ran to my parents' room. My mum was still awake watching TV. My sister Jess followed behind me. She saw the glare of the figure on the TV. Of course, my parents only said, "Stop watching scary movies and go to bed." Because of that experience, I have never seen that movie, The Woman in Black, or The Conjuring. They came out a year or two after that experience occurred. The entity I saw resembled those ladies in the black dress. I do not condone anyone to play the Red Book game. If you do play at your own risk.
Darkness. Pure and simple absence was all that filled the room. The air was as motionless as the walls that held back the light. Yet the void felt as if it had physically manifested itself into something more than nothing. The black area within the four walls felt as if it had become solid. He remained motionless where he lied on the hard floor. He assumed it was concrete. He could feel that his eyelids had opened, but his eyes were unable to decipher anything around him. There was a moment where he considered the possibility that he had gone blind, and that he was actually in a fully lit room. He couldn't dismiss this possibility, but he felt it was more likely that the room was just solid. He pulled himself up to a sitting position and placed his palms on the cold floor. It was smooth, but solid. There was no way it was anything other than concrete. He rubbed the surface and was impressed by the designer's masonry, if only for a moment. Even though there's no light, there has to be a door. He stared into the void. I just have to find it. He began crawling in the direction in front of him. His movement was slow as he reaches out to feel for anything. He had no way of knowing how big the room actually was. As he slowly crept forward, he stopped when his hands hit another rough surface. Bricks. He rubbed the rough wall and felt the spot where they were held together. Okay, so There's this wall. He pulled himself up to a standing position and held the wall, his arms spread out, almost as if he was hugging the solid surface in front of him. He stepped rhythmically in one direction until his hand hit another brick wall. Once he had marked where the corner was in his mind, he turned and stepped in the opposite to judge the size of the room. Much to his dismay, he hit the other corner after only 10 steps. He repeated this process until he was certain that he had hit every corner. The room was 10 steps. He equated this to be about 10 feet, give or take, in each direction. He was trapped in a 10 by 10 room with no light and notably no door. How? How could a room have no door? Unless I was dropped in from a hatch above. He looked up. But there would probably be light coming in if there was a hatch. It would be damn near impossible to block it out that well. He kept his gaze upward. He had no idea where he was and no idea of how he would get out. He wasn't even sure if here was a place or just a fragment of his own imagination. Could a place like this really exist? Could someone have built a light-proof room all around him? Alas, it must be true, but how? How could someone keep him unconscious long enough to build such a complex room around him? The man is not able to comprehend such a thing, for as his thoughts are interrupted by the sound of scraping. It is by no means a metallic sound, but more of nails on a chalkboard. He spins around and around to see where the sound is coming from. However, the darkness consuming the area around him made that task impossible. "Do you know why you're here?" a voice questions. "No," he answers. "You have been a terribly selfish man." "How so?" "Let's start with the child in your neighborhood, shall we? You weren't paying attention to the road when you slammed into him." "That wasn't my fault." "The fault lies with you and you alone. That stupid phone was more important than ensuring the safety of others." "It was an accident. That's all." "Was the girl you assaulted an accident as well?" the voice harshly questions. That was a misunderstanding. "And the man you sent to the hospital? Do you consider beating someone with a lead pipe an accident?" "Look, I've made mistakes in my life, but those instances were in no way my fault." "Absurd. You knew exactly what you were doing, yet you didn't care. Those innocent people's lives were ruined." "And what do you want from me?" the man shouts. "I've apologized. I've paid for my actions. What more is there to do?" "Apologies are worthless if it isn't sincere. I do not care for your apologies, nor do I care if other people have forgiven or simply looked past those horrible things. I, on the other hand, cannot and will not ever forget the monster who assaulted my sister, killed my younger brother, and beat up my brother-in-law." "What?" the man says. Assuming there would be a hint of remorse plastered on this man's face would be premature, for he had committed violent acts and is most likely incapable of feeling anything. "You have not truly paid for your crimes, but don't worry. You have a long time to think everything through." The voice menacingly chuckles. "I would be careful when roaming around that dark room. It can be quite sharp. Please, don't do this. I'm sorry. I don't want to die," the man pleads. An abrupt sound of rushing water floats into the man's line of hearing. He frantically walks around the room in an attempt to find the source for the sound, but there's not one place he could find that would allow any such thing to enter his layered prison. The man bangs his fists against the brick walls, fingernails desperately scratching at the rectangular blocks. Hopelessness washed over the man when water surrounded his knees. He sank to the floor in a helpless manner. He had truly been defeated by a person crazed for revenge for things that this man had done in the past. He had made a lot of regrettable mistakes while he was younger. and he probably didn't think twice about his past coming back to haunt him. Things could have turned out differently had he just come clean and allowed himself to pay the consequences for his actions. The man sits in the water surrounding him, head against the cool surface of the wall behind him. He is doomed to spend the rest of his life in this bricked 10 by 10 foot prison. Doomed to replay those incidents in his mind until he is eventually driven insane. The person whom had built this wall around him must be satisfied with this unfortunate event for the man, for he will be paying the price he should have paid over 8 years ago. One life will waste away, the body withering into nothing as an act of revenge from a person desperate to right the wrongs that had been bestowed upon their family.
Am I going to be charged with murder? The detective sighed. It did not answer. His eyes were tired, haunted. Just help us get to the bottom of this, he said. Okay, I answered. I'll do my best. I could hear the tremor in my voice. I hadn't stopped shaking since it happened. I'd had a strong drink to settle my nerves. It hadn't worked. Let's start at the beginning, said the detective. You were having a Halloween party. Yeah, I said. We do it every year. We take turns hosting, and the whole block participates. This year was our turn. So you're the one who set up the decorations? Yeah, I said. Oh God, that sounds bad. But it wasn't just me. It was lots of people. I was mostly just supervising. Can you give me a list of who was involved? Yeah, it was, I'm sorry. I'm all over the place. Just give me a moment to calm down. I can give you the list. That's okay, we can come back to that. Okay. So who was it that set up the scarecrow? It was me, I said. But I didn't... I didn't do that. I set it up the night before. Someone must have come in during the night and... Oh God. The room swayed, and my breath came sharp and fast. My heart ratcheted up its pace to breakneck speed, and darkness began to close in around my vision. Hey, the detective said. Just calm down. You're hyperventilating. Take long and calm breaths. I did as he said. My heart slowed, but the panic remained. Thanks, I said. Do you think you can keep going? He asked. Yeah, I said. Just give me a moment. My body convulsed with tremors, but in a few minutes, they had settled down to a mild shaking in my hands. I gulped down a hard knot in my throat. Okay, I said. I'm ready. So the scarecrow, the detective prompted. The word filled me with dread. The scarecrow, I repeated numbly. It's a Halloween tradition. The neighbor said as much. You destroy it every year? Yeah, I said. Usually it's filled with candy and straw, like a piñata. The kids beat it with sticks, and everyone has a good time. I just don't understand. God, why would someone do that? It's too early to speculate, said the detective. Right now we are gathering the facts. When did you notice that something was wrong? Well, right away, I noticed that the scarecrow wasn't coming apart as easily as it should have been, but I just thought that I had put it together too well. So I grabbed a stick and... Yes, I took a swing. The detective leaned forward. And then what happened? My shoulders slumped. My mouth was cottony and dry. And then, I said, the scarecrow began to bleed. And there was a pregnant pause. The detective's eyes bored into mine. willing me to continue. He said nothing, and I had to fill the silence. It fell over, I said. The hat came off, and we saw that it was a body. What happened then? The kids started screaming. One girl started it, the Oakley girl, I think, and then they all went off. We, the other parents and I, we pulled them all away. We called the police and, well, that's it. You know the rest. The detective scribbled his last note and closed the fold-top notebook he'd been writing in. His eyes were hard, dull gray stone, impossible to read. When he spoke again, his words were measured, careful. His voice was soft. What interests me, Mr. Johnson, he said, is that you haven't asked about your wife. The question caught me completely off guard. My wife, I said. She's out of town. Oh God, she's going to freak when she finds out what happened. She hates the block Halloween party enough as it is. Your wife is out of town? Probed the detective. The question poked a fresh wound. Yes, I said, forgetting my fear in an amount of irritation. She and my son are spending the holiday with her parents in Virginia. That seems strange, the detective said. A family spending a holiday apart. I got the feeling he knew something more than he was letting on. Have you talked to her? I said. I'd like to hear your side. My wife and I are going through a rough patch right now, I said, but I don't see why this is relevant. It's our job to gather all the information, he said. Then we can decide what is and what isn't relevant. Why was your wife not spending the holiday with you? I sighed. I wasn't proud of it, but I was getting flustered. I could feel hot blood rising to my face. We separated, I said. Why is that? It's personal. Your wife said that it was related to infidelity. So you have talked to her? Yes. Fine, I said. You know, I cheated on my wife. I destroyed our family. It's all my fault. Now, I've had a hell of a day. So if you don't mind, can you please tell me what the fuck this has to do with anything? The detective paused. He spoke softly. Your wife is in police custody, Mr. Johnson. What? I am so sorry to tell you this, he said. But she had rendered a full confession. A full confession for what? What the hell are you talking about? It happens occasionally in cases of separation, he said. One party feels the need to punish the other. Unfortunately, the children are sometimes used as a tool to that end. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. The room swam. Bile rose in my throat. Oh God, I gasped. Oh God, no. I am afraid we have positively identified the remains as belonging to your son, Ben, he said. The scream died in my throat. I blacked out.
Halloween ain't scary. I've known that ever since I've been old enough to know what it was. I know it as I arrived to school in the old white sheet with 2 holes cut out. It's my costume, and it'll do. As I close my locker, I'm greeted with a boo from some dumb kid wearing a scream mask. He must think he's pretty clever. I shrug at him and start in the other direction. I know it as my teacher lines us up for the annual 8th grade haunted house. I walk through, hounded by plastic skeletons and fake blood, a mechanical scream and crackling. It's exhausting. I don't even flinch. I know it as the teacher dismisses us for the day with a warning to be careful trick-or-treating tonight. Beware of pranksters and child snatchers and people who put razor blades in candy. Stay with your friends or a trusted adult. Come home at a reasonable hour. Don't make yourself vulnerable to strangers. I know it as the teacher is talking nonsense, that trick-or-treating isn't risky or dangerous. It's an excuse. It's an opportunity. I know it as I know that, statistically speaking, you're far more likely to be harmed by a family member than a complete stranger. Same goes for kidnapping. I know it as I walk the streets at night, clutching my worn pillowcase, wrestling with rappers, and hope against hope that day, reality will defy the odds. That I'll be taken. That some lunatic in a white van will come up behind me, grab me, throw me in his trunk. I know it as I realize the front porch lights of all the houses are turned off. It's time to go home. For the first time today, I feel fear. I know it as I walk home as slowly as possible and think about next year. I'll be in high school. People will begin to look at me funny when they answer the door. They'll say I'm too old. It's okay. I'll just wear this ghost costume again so no one sees my face. And I'll do the same thing the year after that. I'll do it for as long as I have to. I know it as I scramble to suck down as many candies as possible while I can. Damn, no razor blades. I hear footsteps. Halloween ain't scary. It's a special time of year. The leaves have started to change color and blanket the ground below the now bare trees. The fronts of the supermarkets are lined with decorations, costumes, and candies. The spirit Halloween stores, timely specters that they are, reanimate and set up shop all across town. And every year, as the season begins to creep up on us like a routine plague, I think the same thing. God, I hate Halloween. There's always so much work to do, and somehow, despite the weeks of warning, it always seems to creep up on me. Take this year for instance, a week away, and I've only just settled on the perfect house. It's easy if you know where to look. This year, I settled on a 2-story at the end of the one-way street, who lives out of town, put it up for market after their house flipping project ran out of money. Their asking price was too high, so it quietly sat on the market for a while. Sad for them, perfect for me. Of course, my work has only just begun. I need to get decorations for the front entry, supplies for the harvesting, a van for transportation, candy for trick-or-treaters, and a fake ID for any police officers who come by. It'll all be worth it in the end. See, when the light's on out front, the children come knocking. Some have parents, others travel with friends, and an unfortunate few walk the dark streets of Halloween night all alone.
Message to temporary employee. On behalf of the entire organization, we would like to thank you for filling in tonight. We do not doubt the offer arrived last minute, and we apologize for any inconvenience this may have caused you. Our usual night watchman had a family emergency, so you are doing us a huge service by being here tonight. On top of these expressions of gratitude, you will also be compensated 5 times the average hourly rate. The temporary employment agency has been informed of these unique circumstances. Hopefully they briefed you on the agreement ahead of time. At first glance, your duty for the night may appear simple, but we strongly urge you to stay vigilant. For the duration of your shift, you will remain at the post in the reception area. Your job is to ensure that no one enters after hours. The door you entered through is the only entrance into the compound. All employees are aware the night watchman is the only person permitted in the building past operating hours. You are unlikely to run into any trouble, but we operate under the belief it is better safe than sorry. Just remember to stay in the reception area during your shift. Thank you again for filling the position. We are confident in your success. P.S. The doors deeper into the facility are chained for your convenience. You are the only person in the facility, and the chains should not be unlocked for any reasons. No exceptions. I finished reading the letter for the second time and looked back at the key sitting on the desk. I hadn't noticed it when I first walked in because it was underneath the paper with my instructions. I hadn't tried to use it, but judging by the size, I was almost certain it fit the padlock keeping the doors in the postscript of the letter chained. With the paper still in my hand, I made my way to the doors. The majority of the reception area resembled a doctor's office, in both furnishings and sterility. There was even a stack of beat-up magazines on the coffee table in the middle of the sitting area. Saying the chain door stood out in the room, that was a bit of an understatement. They were thick metal pocket doors that, even when pulled together, appeared to have a lot of unseen surface area deep into the walls on either side. The tops and bottom of each were reinforced to the point where I was pretty sure a truck would have a hard time getting through. The handles of each door bolted and welded tight to the surfaces. A hefty metal chain snaked through both of the handles and held together by a substantial padlock. Both doors were covered in stickers reading some variation of, "Warning, door must remain closed at all times." More than a few written in different languages. For a short time, I stood in front of the massive doors before returning my attention to the key on the desk. I tried in vain to piece together why someone would say there are no exceptions to keeping a door closed, but leave the key so easily accessible. Especially someone who didn't even require a proper background check before being hired for a single night. I threw my hands up, waving the white instruction paper as a sign of unconditional surrender. It wasn't like this job had been conventional from the start. Jobs I got from the temp company usually came with information about necessary skills or a description of duties ahead of time. This offer hadn't even listed the name of the company. I hadn't heard of Homa Dynamics before walking up to the strange hourglass logo on the front door. Before reading the instructions, the only thing I knew about the gig was that it was a night shift, the address, and the obscene amount of money they were paying. Unfortunately, the last piece of information was enough to ignore the red flags. I was falling behind on more than a few bills, and making 5 days worth of money in a single night. That would let me pull my head above water for the first time in a long while. Retreating back to the desk, I placed the key on top of the instructions, folded the paper, and slid it to the far side of the desk. There was a younger version of myself who wouldn't have hesitated to unlock the industrial doors and explore a secretive company's compound. But the decisions that version of me made was why I was in my 30s working temp jobs to attempt to make ends meet. So, I was happy to sit behind someone else's desk and be grateful I had been able to pay off my data plan last month. For the first few hours, keeping myself occupied was really the only difficult part of the job. Around 3 in the morning, I had gotten bored of social media, and my battery was starting to die. I had just started flipping through an ancient highlights magazine, and wondering why any kid would be hanging out in this waiting area. And that's when I heard something. At least, I had thought I heard something. A faint slam that could have been something falling off the shelf or a door closing somewhere on the other side of the chain doors. I looked up from a spot the difference photo comparison. I was embarrassingly struggling to find the final difference. and looked towards the door, straining my ears to see if there was any follow-up to confirm I had heard something in the first place. A little while passed in complete silence. I closed the wrinkled kids magazine and made my way back to the coffee table in the waiting area. I was in front of the chain metal doors when there was another bang. Either louder or closer than the last one, and unmistakably the sound of a door slamming. I stopped mid-stride and turned my head towards the chain doors. The hairs on my arm and neck at attention, and my mouth suddenly dry. In my mind, I reread the part of the instructions telling me I was the only person in the facility, and there was only one way into the building. Another extended period of total silence. But I wasn't able to shrug this one off. I could feel my heart beating in my chest, but I was feeling bold. I came to the decision that if I could get closer to the door, I might be able to hear better. If I didn't hear anything else, I could chalk it up to a door or two being blown closed by a breeze. I made my way towards the chain doors, being sure to walk as quietly as possible. Deep down, hoping if somebody was in the building, they hadn't realized I was here too. Standing below the doors, they looked more massive than my first impression. Again, standing quietly, trying to hear anything on the other side of the door. I closed my eyes in some attempt to focus more on my hearing. There wasn't another slamming door, but a few times, I thought I heard something. A repetitive soft tapping, just at the edge of my range of hearing. But it was possible my mind was playing tricks on me. I understood what needed to be done. With my eyes still closed, I carefully put my ear against the cold metal door. I kept my breathing shallow and steady, to not pollute my ears with any extra noise. And I listened. I didn't hear anything right away, but as my ear adjusted, I could tell there was definitely something making noise beyond the doors. A chill washed down my back, and I realized it was closer to me than the slammed doors had been. The taps were constant in their production, but not in location, moving back and forth around the building, sometimes getting closer, and other times further away. Footsteps. I stifled a gasp when I came to the realization. I was certain they were footsteps, but there was something off about them. There were too many at any given time to be a single person, but they moved too uniform from place to place to be a group of people. A cold sweat came over me when I started wondering what combination of that information could mean. I knew I needed to get away from the door and let someone know, but my instructions hadn't left any contact information. Pushing gently away from the door, I wondered if there was maybe a phone number in the desk drawer. I was only halfway through the thought when a metallic clatter directly beside me shattered the silence. I opened my eyes and looked down at its origin. The children's activity book I'd completely forgotten about was tangled in the chains, causing them to make contact with the metal door. I clenched my teeth and hoped I hadn't been noticed. For a short silence, I was hopeful. But that hope quickly evaporated as I heard the footsteps. Far away at first, but getting closer fast. the continuous thud of far too many feet closing in directly on my location. Without breaking my eyeline on the door, I backed away from the approaching clatter, dropping the magazine that sold me out in the process. My back pressed against the exit when the thing first made contact with the chain door. Sudden heavy pounding erupted from the other side. A moment ago the door seemed impenetrable, but now I watched as it shuddered with each hit. Turning to the exit, I placed my hand on the knob, but it wouldn't turn in my hand. I looked down for some sort of latching mechanism, but there wasn't even a keyhole. The realization I had been locked in from the other side hit me in waves. With the slamming getting only more intense behind me, I desperately pushed on the door with my full body weight. For a few moments, I was lost completely in my goal of escape. I was flooded with so much fear. I hadn't even registered the assault on the chain door had halted. I was still trying to force the exit open when I heard a voice. "Excuse me? Is there someone out there that can help me?" The voice spoke in a calm, disjointed manner. It sounded like it was coming at me from all directions. I abruptly stopped pounding on the exit and felt my shoulders relax. Without really thinking of why, I turned back towards the warning-covered metal doors and stood silently. I was unable to answer the voice's questions. "Thank goodness you're there, friend. It's embarrassing to admit, but I fell asleep at my desk and they must have mistakenly locked me in here." I took a step towards the large doorway, still unable to speak to the voice. But for some reason, that inability didn't seem very important. "I'm gonna guess you aren't the usual guy. I apologize if I gave you a scare, friend. Would you mind doing me a huge favor and grab that key off the desk beside you?" I continued to slowly move towards the chain doorway, but I veered a little to my right towards the reception desk when he said this, my hand hovering over the folded paper where I had left the key. What a wild situation, right, friend? Usually I'd just wait for the workday to start, but my phone is dead. I bet the wife and kids are worried sick about me. Just go ahead and grab that key. My attention's still on the door. I grabbed the paper and dumped the key into my hand. "Friend, you're a lifesaver. You'll need to stick around after your shift. The guys aren't gonna believe me when I tell them. Just put the key in the lock and let me out." Moving briskly now, I clutched the key in my hand tight enough to draw blood. My other hand reached out for the lock before even getting to the doorway. I have no doubt I would have opened the door if I hadn't stumbled on the highlights magazine on the floor where I dropped it. The unexpected movement breaking me out of whatever hold the voice had on me. I winced as a sudden explosion of pain entered my head. "Friend, come on now. I just need you to put the key in the lock and let me out. Don't make me wait here all night. I'm starting to get hungry." The voice sounded less casual, and now held an undertone that was decidedly less human than before. Still, I could feel it washing over me again, and I felt the need to unlock the door. So I did the only thing I could do. I lightly slid the key between the crack where the pocket doors emerged from the wall. It was easily big enough for the thin key to slide through, but far too small for my hand to get it back. An immediate cacophony of pounds met the other side of the door where the key left my hand. The large metal slab shuddering against the attack. I retreated once again to the exit on the other side of the room, but I didn't try to get through this time. It was clear that my only chance of safety was the chain doors. For hours, the thing behind the chain doors, it alternated between besieging the door with its might and silences while it recovered its strength. Each renewed assault seemed like it would be the last. The metal doors shook against its attacks, but they never gave out. After a particularly long silence, I assumed the thing was prepared for the final charge. Instead, the exit door it was pushed tightly against gave way, and I fell backwards into the early morning light. I blinked in surprise, looking up at a confused man wearing a lab coat. I recognized the familiar hourglass logo embroidered over the name tag that read, Dr. Brown. "Jesus, are you still?" Dr. Brown started to say, but caught himself before he finished. "I mean, you must be the temporary night watchman. Nice to meet you." Maybe I should have pressed him for answers or even gotten up and punched him. But in that moment, I just continued to lay on the ground in disbelief. "Well, looks like great work tonight," Dr. Brown said insincerely, while craning his neck to look at the reception area. "Looks like the door is still locked. Do you mind heading back in for a coffee or tea?" I was on my feet before he finished the sentence and sped out of the parking lot as fast as possible. My last memory of the building was Dr. Brown in the rearview mirror on the phone. From his body language, he didn't seem happy, and it didn't look like he had any interest in going inside.
My MSN crush was involved in something sinister, and I was the target. I'm mostly a lurker on here, but have considered sharing my story several times. I was hesitant because absolutely no one knows about this. Not my family nor my friends. I've held on to this for 10 years now, and figured it was time to let it out. Plus, I think there are some valuable lessons that can be learned from my experience. Here we go. Caution, long story ahead. For reference, I am a 27-year-old female, and this story takes place 10 years ago when I was 17. I had just started university and was excited about having a fresh new start, since I'd always been a nerdy outcast in high school. I had never had a boyfriend before. I'd never even been on a date, so I was naive and optimistic about boys. My introverted and awkward personality hadn't magically changed since entering university, so it's safe to say that I didn't meet any interesting guys at school. One late night, I was in my room working on an assignment on my laptop when I received a request on MSN Messenger. The email address was a boy's name with some numbers. The name was clearly ethnic and likely someone of the same origin as me. Intrigued, I accepted. For the sake of the story, we'll call this boy Ken. We got to chatting and I asked him how he had gotten my email address. He dodged the question. I let it go, not thinking too much of it. This was from a time when it was normal to accept anyone and everyone as a friend on Facebook and other social media platforms. As Ken and I continued to talk, I learned that he lived in my city and apparently wasn't much older than me. As I'd guessed, our roots were in fact in the same country, Let's call it the motherland. I asked him why he didn't have a picture of himself on his display picture, and this prompted him to suggest that we turn on our webcams because he wanted to see me too. I declined, but he insisted. Somehow he convinced me, and we both switched on our webcams. I was pleasantly surprised and somewhat relieved to see that Ken was a good-looking young guy, chatting to me from the comfort of his bedroom, seemingly very normal. Our MSN chats carried on for a couple of weeks. They developed into texts, and we even had a few phone calls, after I had agreed to give him my phone number. I started to develop a crush on Ken. He'd asked me to go out with him a couple of times, but I was always pretty busy with school and our schedules weren't lining up. Finally, we found one afternoon when we were both free and decided to schedule a lunch date. Ken had a car and offered to pick me up from my university after I was done for the day. I was a little too dressed up for my C+ programming class, but just right for the lunch date we had planned at a local vegetarian restaurant. Stupidly, I didn't tell any of my friends where I was going or with whom, because I was embarrassed about going on my very first date, at almost age 18, with someone who had randomly added me on MSN. I waited outside my building when a black car with heavily tinted windows pulled up beside me. The passenger side window rolled down and, sure enough, there was Ken, sitting in the driver's seat. I was happy to see that he was as cute in person as he was on webcam. However, what I wasn't expecting was the intense smell of weed floating out of the car. Not relevant, but part of the first impression. Admittedly, I was taken a bit back, and was concerned that he might be driving high. He unlocked the doors and motioned for me to get in, so I did without dispute. As I sat down in the passenger seat, he immediately put his hand on my thigh. I nervously shifted my leg away. "So," I started, "do you know where the restaurant is? I can guide you if you want." He smirked at me but didn't say anything and just started driving. Okay, kinda weird. I thought maybe he was just nervous or awkward, both of which I could sympathize with. So I let it be. I was about to try my hand at a little small talk, which I'm no good at, when I noticed him heading towards the highway ramp. I started to worry because the restaurant was not far from my campus, and there was no reason for us to be getting on the highway. You don't need to take the highway. The restaurant is really close by, I can guide you." I tried to keep my voice steady, but I could hear my own nervousness. Ken finally spoke, for the first time since I'd gotten into the car. I thought maybe we could just go to my place instead. We can play Need for Speed and I can make lunch for you. I was 17, on my way to the house of a guy I just met for the first time, and I hadn't told anyone where I was going. My mind was racing. I knew that this would be an utterly stupid thing to do. Despite the clear red flags waving in my face, I decided that I didn't want to ruin our first date by rejecting his offer to make me lunch and play NFS together, which I told him I liked playing. Don't judge me. So, like an idiot, I reluctantly agreed to avoid being rude. We made it to his house. It was apparently his family's home and was situated in a sort of shady neighborhood. We stepped inside and, of course, no one was home except for us. It was sparsely furnished and looked unkempt, which struck me as pretty odd for a family home. He informed me that his Xbox was in his bedroom. I hesitated in the doorway, but he sat at the foot of the bed, in front of the TV, and patted the empty space beside him for me to have a seat. There was literally nowhere else to sit in his room, so I cautiously sat down, keeping as much distance as I could between us. I started to relax as we played NFS, and he made us PB&Js to munch on. I was about to laugh at myself for being overly paranoid, when Ken did something bizarre. He got up onto the bed and sat down directly behind me. his legs on either side of me, an extremely awkward position, and tried to guide my hands on the controller. I started to ask him what he was doing, and, as if this wasn't uncomfortable enough, his hands moved from the controller and slid up under my shirt. That's when I really started to panic. I thought he was going to grope my chest, but instead he started squeezing and massaging my belly. I was more than a little chubby back then. Freshman 15 and then some. So you can imagine what that might have been like. I dropped the controller in pure shock and stood up, fixing my shirt. I was at a loss for words, and he did nothing but smirk at me and tell me he liked it. I felt completely disgusted and violated. I'd had enough. I lied and told him that I had a group project to work on and needed to go. He asked where I lived, so he could drop me home. Thankfully, I had the common sense to not tell him, and I asked him to drop me back to school instead, where I would be supposedly meeting my classmates. He obliged. After our very uncomfortable first date, I decided I didn't want to talk to Ken anymore. I didn't block him on MSN or on my phone, our only two methods of communication, but I rarely responded to his messages and I ignored all of his calls. Once, he messaged me on MSN around 11 p.m., asking me to come over and telling me that he would send a cab to bring me over to his place. Thoroughly annoyed, I responded, "What do you take me for? Why do you even think I would want to do that?" He replied saying, "No sex, I promise." Just bizarre. I was disgusted and didn't even respond. He continued trying to get in touch with me for months, and then suddenly vanished. I figured he'd finally gotten the point. Now, I wish the story ended here, but it doesn't. I last heard from Ken in late February. He had stopped trying to contact me shortly after Valentine's Day. In April, two nuclear families and I went on holiday to visit another relative, who we'll call Anne, who was living in the Caribbean at the time. Anne, whom I loved dearly, was, and still is, a bit of an eccentric. She considers herself very spiritual and is an active member of a large, well-known spiritual organization. She is deeply connected with Motherland, more than the rest of us are, and goes back for frequent visits. While we stayed with her in the Caribbean, she told us about her most recent spiritual trip to the Motherland, where she met a wealthy and well-connected local woman through the organization, who quickly became a very close friend. Let's call her Connie, the con artist. During our visit, Anne introduced us to Connie virtually over Skype, because Connie lives in the Motherland. We chatted with her a couple of times throughout our vacation, via Skype, and got to know her a little bit. Little did we know back then that Connie, who Anne had spontaneously met halfway across the world in Motherland, would soon wreak utter havoc on our lives. Now that's a story that I'm just not, and may never be, ready to tell because of how many lives were affected and the severity of the damage that had been inflicted. What you need to know is that Connie was an outright criminal and con artist who had been targeting our family from long before Anne had actually met her. Their meeting was no coincidence. Not only did she manage to steal over $100,000 from our family, but she took any peace of mind or sense of security we ever had. When we finally caught on and confronted her, she insisted that we were mistaken, but disappeared into thin air once we forced her out of our lives. You're probably wondering what on earth this has to do with my story about Ken. Well, get this. The situation with Connie lasted many months. The whole thing is kind of a blur to me now. But we first spoke to her online in April, and I remember the whole ordeal lasting well into the fall. While she normally resided in Motherland, Anne had invited her to visit and stay with us where we, my whole family and I, presently live. That's when things really took a turn for the worse. Some of the things I clearly remember and are important to the story were that, 1, the whole time she was staying with us, she was trying to convince me to transfer schools to a very obscure school and program in the U.S. I don't even live in the U.S., and was actually getting very pushy about it, and too. She had asked me if I was a virgin and told me to save myself for my husband. Disturbing, I know. During this time, I was so emotionally drained and stressed that I didn't even really think of anything but the situation at hand. In fact, I had stopped socializing almost entirely, and even started habitually skipping classes. I had lost contact with my high school friends, and my university friends were too new to really care. So my strange behavior and new destructive habits went unnoticed. Fast forward to one day, after Connie's final disappearance in the fall. I was at home with my dad when my cell phone rang. I looked at the caller ID and it was a number I didn't have saved. So it was showing the contact information as whatever name the phone was registered under. My heart dropped into my stomach. My phone displayed a name. The first name was a man's name, and the last name was the same last name as Connie's. I started to panic and ran into my bedroom to answer the call. I had no idea what to expect. When I picked up the phone, I was greeted by a familiar voice. It was Ken. I honestly thought I was going to puke when I came to a sudden realization that he had been part of this whole sick plot. Of course, I don't have hard evidence to prove that he was connected to Connie, but let me explain. The timing of his appearance and reappearance into my life, the last name, a fairly unique surname, originating from the part of Motherland where Connie is from, and I had never known Ken's last name until then. And the fact that he contacted me out of the blue, and I had no idea why or how, were all too bizarre to be a mere coincidence. Of course, I freaked out at Ken when he called, and I told him that if he ever called me again, I would call the police. His response was just a weird, dry half laugh, and then he said, "Well, okay then," in the most creepy voice you can think of, and hung up. I knew in my gut that this was their last attempt to get back in touch and somehow slither their way back into mine, my family's lives. Thankfully, I never heard from Ken again after that day. A while after this all ended, I was having a conversation with a family member who was also very closely involved in all of this, about the whole ordeal, and she told me she'd sensed something extremely wrong when Connie was pushing to have me sent off to the US, to that obscure school. She had an unshakable feeling that Connie was involved in some sort of human trafficking scene, and that if I left, she would never see me again. The horrifying pieces came together for me at that time. I was just too damn naive to have seen it before. The memories flooded back to me when I heard that. How Ken had told me no sex, I promise, when he invited me over, and how Connie was telling me to remain a virgin. As I said, I'd never told a soul about Ken, nor about the weird V-card conversation with Connie. I strongly and firmly believe that Ken had been some sort of player in Connie's game, and was just there to keep me away from guys and prevent me from having a boyfriend. For those who may be wondering, we never called the police on Connie or Ken because nothing illegal happened at face value. It's very hard to explain. I'll also mention that I tried to find Ken online many times after this all ended. I don't know why. I felt like I wanted to expose him or to call him out, and was not able to find even a sliver of information on him. Not by the name Ken, nor by the name on the caller ID. It was as if he didn't even exist. Also, I am awful at directions and didn't remember his address or where his house was exactly. I'm sorry if the story is convoluted or confusing. I'm trying to get my point across without giving out any names or too many details, which makes it a little challenging. I hope this can serve as a warning to young people to never trust anyone, to do your thorough checks on people, especially those you meet online, and to be very aware and wary of people's intentions. Also, from this incident onward, I can't stomach a lot of these spiritual organizations. I never liked the idea of them to begin with, but now that I've truly experienced how they can attract both vulnerable people and also unsavory characters, who are looking for someone vulnerable to prey on. No judgment for those who are into that sort of thing. It's just definitely not for me. I would like to hear what you guys think about this. Do you think my suspicions are plausible? What do you make of this? Stay safe, everyone. And to Ken and Connie, if I see either of you again, I'll kick you in the face. Rot in hell.
Last summer, 2019, my current armed security company was working an old defunct factory in southern Pueblo, Colorado, not far from the steelworks mill. The new owner of this property was planning on converting this property into the largest indoor medical marijuana grow in the state, but it was severely run down and massively unstable. In all reality, the structure should have been condemned. Because it was full of holes in the walls and windows, homeless people would go in and squat over the years, and some died of exposure, and occasionally local gangs would do unlawful acts there. The new owner thought boarding it up and placing an expensive alarm system would be more than enough to deter people from unlawfully entering. After about a month, we were hired to watch the facility in the overnight hours. This location was horrible. Chemical waste that turned into sludge puddled on the floor in spots. Bullet holes riddled the walls and pillars in the back warehouse. Black mold and other issues were present. The old Foreman Overlook office was structurally unsafe, contended to a no longer existent catwalk. For the first 2 or so months, I didn't work the site, but was hearing about other officers who encountered a phenomenon that seemed otherworldly, even going as far as one of my staff getting a rosary blessed by his priest to wear while working there. Now, being a very hot and dry area of the state, the summers in Pueblo were unforgiving in our all-black uniforms and level 3A soft armor vests, and the dark of the night wasn't much of a relief. In late May, I had my first scheduled shift. I wasn't told by a supervisor until just after 9 p.m. that the alarm system was temporarily shut off, so I had to enter this disgusting place to ensure that no one was inside. Luckily, we were provided breathing apparatuses because of the chemical waste and mold. The inside warehouses were massive, breaking into smaller bays and rooms that had high concrete walls. It looked more like a bunker than an old factory. I started with the smaller front offices. All seemed relatively fine until I found the kitchen area or break room. All I know for sure is it had a sink and a broken disconnected stove. In the corner of the room behind the stove was a fully formed painted pentagram with Jewish symbols at each point. A tightening chill ran through my back, but I kept moving forward. Further down, when I entered the northern warehouse, I noticed mist, like when you exhale during the winter, coming from my breath. This was eerie. This was May, a relatively hot month, and especially for Pueblo. I didn't feel cold, and I wasn't smoking in the building, so this made no logical sense. As I was pondering this, my LED rechargeable flashlight began dimming aggressively. I had charged the battery for a full 8 hours the night before, and it was still relatively new, but a drain like this I had never seen on any battery-operated flashlight. I was starting to feel like maybe the others I had heard stories from were at the time not over-exaggerating the sinister feel to this place. I pulled out my phaser enforcer, basically a variant of the taser, and pressed on down the darkened room. The feeling of eyes fixed on me was incredible. Yet no visible person or animal was seen. I finally reached the adjoining corridor that leads into the back storage hallway, but this was still a massive room, extending most of the length of the building, and large enough for pallet loaders to pass by each other. I went down about 50 yards, still in darkness except for my phaser's light, when I came upon a rear door that opened out to the train yard. I decided that now was a good time to stop and have a cigarette to calm myself a little, as creepy wasn't a part of my training. After 2 or 3 drags, a loud, guttural, echoing hiss rang out menacingly from the side I had yet to check. The cavernous hallway surely must have amplified it, I thought. I stomped the butt quickly and secured the door behind me. I held my phaser at low ready in my off hand, and my other was pressed to my sidearm, ready to draw on a moment's notice. I then realized the back area that this hall ended at was a loading dock. Wooden boards covered the bay doors, winds, and the only peak of light bleeding in was from the weather siding on one of the rolling doors that had come loose. The only walking entrance door was at the far end past all 6 bays. I scanned each corner of the room. It was still large, but greatly smaller compared to the warehouse rooms, so it was much quicker to check, but nothing seemed to be there that could have been making the hissing noise. No animals, no old equipment, and no machinery. I checked the door at the far end to ensure it was locked, then retraced my path from the front office. The whole time making my way towards the exit, I felt that someone or something was in tow on my heel. I reached the front entrance, but found I had somehow been locked in. This frightened me, as the only way to currently lock this door was using a padlock on the exterior, and I had the lock in my pocket. I started kicking the door to open it, getting a little heated, but just before the 4th kick, I heard a voice from the other side yell, "Stop." The voice said that he was an officer from the Pueblo Police Department, and I identified myself as well. He and another officer opened the door as somehow a small roofing nail that was thick enough to lodge into the slot got in the hole, but it doesn't explain the latch being closed. I was telling the officers that the alarm was not functioning, and I was checking to ensure no one entered. The older of the 2 officers informed me that I was nuts, as they never enter that building unless they have a minimum of 4 officers. As I was placing the actual lock back on to secure the door, still speaking with the cops, I asked them what they came here for. "We received a 911 call from this location," they responded. I replied with, "Like, from inside the building?" One of them went to their car and double-checked and confirmed that it came from inside and listed to the property. "You guys might not want to hear this, but the phones, plumbing, and electricity are all shut off to this place," I said while confirming this with the point of contact on the contract. They stayed for a few minutes more before leaving, and I didn't go back in for the rest of the night. The next day, after that shift, I woke up to find 9 scratches on my back and felt like I had no energy, like I had the worst hangover ever without even drinking. I ended up having to call off for the shift at a different location because I was so weak and drained. Later that week, the property owner was able to get cameras and better security sensors installed on the building, but kept us on to watch the outside perimeter. Luckily, I never had to go back into that place again, only sit at the gate. But I know for myself now that something dark lingers inside that old factory. Around August of last year, we lost the contract due to the property owner selling it off, as it had become a money pit for him. He said he dumped in hundreds of thousands of dollars, but progress always seemed to slow, almost like it would reverse. I'm pretty sure whatever was in there didn't like them messing with its home.
I've done plenty of research into this, and now I am certain what I say is 100% true. There are still parts I don't understand, but that's the reason I wrote this report, so others could give me their own theories. I'm 19. I go to school at Angelo State University in San Angelo, Texas. I grew up in Waco, a city in Northeast Texas. I lived down there with my mom and my then 18-year-old brother, David. I was 15 at the time. David was a genius. The soon-to-be valedictorian already had scored a fatty scholarship at UT. He wasn't a nerd by any standards. He was a starting basketball player and a power lifter. Literally a perfect child. Anyways, the Smithsonian Society, or one of the national honor things, had a trip for seniors that year to send 15 young brain children to Brazil to study plant life. Most people would kill not to go on a trip that consisted of putting leaves in beakers, but David went apeshit and begged Mom to go. It was probably 3 weeks he was gone. He left during Christmas break and actually missed the holidays that year, but he loved it, so we were okay with it. So fast forward to the day he got back from Brazil. He could have skipped about a week of school justifiably, but 1, he had his first game, and 2, he wouldn't miss school for the world. I remember the day he got back and we picked him up at the airport. He looked perfectly fine, healthy and happy. In fact, he wouldn't stop blabbering about the goddamn plants on the way home. I was surprised Mom didn't drive off the road and kill all of us for a moment of silence. It wasn't until a couple of days later that I noticed something weird. It was after David's first game, and he looked like hell. He was pale, walked everywhere like he was exhausted. He just said it was the first game that blew him out. I didn't have the nerve to tell him he shouldn't be tired because he played terribly and coach hardly put him in. He still got up every morning, went to practice and school, each day looking worse and worse, paler, moving slower and slower. After about a week, my mom insisted he go to a doctor. All of us went. I had to make sure he was okay. I was legitimately scared for him. It was at the office when we saw it. He pulled his shirt up to put on a stethoscope or something, and we saw a large green, algae-like growth on the side of his ribs. I can still remember my mom's shocked expression as she shouted, "David, why didn't you tell us about this before?" His only explanation was a blank expression for a whole minute, even after Mom yelling at him over and over for an answer. Eventually, he managed, "It told me not to tell." After that, he was put in the hospital overnight until we could figure out what the hell was going on. It was probably a whole month that he lay in the hospital. I visited him every day as soon as I got out of school. I could describe each visit, but frankly, they were bland and he said nothing. Ever. It was on February 2nd, 2008 that it happened. I was laying in bed listening to some music, my typical nightly routine before I went to sleep. I felt kind of hungry. I got up and crept downstairs in hopes of snatching a midnight snack of some kind. It was at least 1 a.m., and I was tired. My half-blurred vision led me to the refrigerator. I remember hearing footsteps. "Mom!" I quickly but quietly tiptoed behind a wall where I wouldn't be visible. Then I heard it. The words that would haunt me forever. David's voice whispering angrily at no one. No, I won't do it. I'm not ready to die." Eventually, his argument with the non-existent voice grew louder until he was nearly yelling, "No, I won't. Eventually, I grew the balls to peek around the corner. "David?" I flipped on the light, knowing what I saw would be terrible. But I was wrong. It was terrifying. His eyes were rolled in the back of his head. Clumps of his hair were missing. He had scratch marks all over his body from where he had apparently clawed himself. David looked around, apparently now blind from his condition. "David, it's me." David looked around and replied softly, just when I was certain of what he said. "Goodbye." Suddenly, his whole body lost control as if he had been tased. His arms flailed for a moment, and he fell over, cracking his head on our dinner table. Blood poured onto the ground as his muscles slowly relaxed and he collapsed into a heap on the floor. He was dead. The police report stated that he died from his condition, not a suicide, not anything, just died of natural causes. I made it along. No one believed me when I told them of what I saw, so quickly I stopped telling people. And with a closed casket funeral, I was the only one of our friends and family to see him looking like a zombie. Other than my mom, who was in utter denial about the whole thing and ended up on her deathbed from similar symptoms herself, just a couple of months later. Like anything else, it kind of just disappeared. After researching the topic and essentially making it my hobby to research throughout high school, I have accumulated the following facts. In certain parts of Africa, Brazil, and Thailand, there is a rare fungus known scientifically as Ophiurocordyceps unilaterus, or its more common nickname, zombie fungi. It infects certain species of ants and essentially possesses their small brains so they will walk to a decent place for the fungi to reproduce. Then the fungi kills the ant and spreads in its new area. After the accident, I grew a green clump on my leg. I had it surgically amputated early on before it had the chance to grow. I don't know if David was the first. I don't know if my mother infected anyone. There's a chance, though. I don't know about the other 14 kids. However, I do know it is out there. And I know there's no cure.
I studied the VHS tape. It was one of those pop-in shells, the ones that have an open slot in the center where you can throw in a camera cartridge and watch your home movies without having to process them at a film store. It was exactly what I was looking for. Any idea where this came from? I asked. No, the man replied, wiping away about a quarter of the sweat that had gathered in his beard. The rest of it kept dripping on the remainder of his strange wares. He watched me with utter disdain, but I gave it another shot. Really? Where did you find this? Come on, a little bit of background would be nice. It's not a boutique, buddy. You're at a flea market. You either buy it or you can fuck off. Too hot to deal with this detective shit, he said. But then, probably because I was the only customer at his stall, his tone softened. You got it from a storage unit auction. That's all I can tell you. Don't keep track of this shit. I just sell it. That's all the information I needed. I paid the man and took my mysterious prize home. Back in the early 2000s, I consumed YouTube vlogs like they were fine caviar, and I was a Russian oligarch. There was just something about being able to kick back and become an invisible observer in someone else's existence that really got to me. Don't get me wrong, I wasn't some desperate basement dweller. I still had a functioning life of my own, but when evening came and all my responsibilities were checked off, I'd jump behind my computer desk and take a break from reality. I'd sit back and watch hours upon hours of other people's lives. I watched a lone man beat cancer, a promising student struggling with pills, a teenage mother who cracked under the pressure of her new responsibilities. I watched people overcome and spiral and regress. I watched slices of raw humanity from all across the globe, from the comfort of my own home. I got to get a taste of fates I never would have considered otherwise. A bunch of people speaking to inanimate objects reminded me that the world outside was vaster than I ever could conceive. Then the internet money rolled in and ruined it all. As soon as the people bearing their souls into the camera lens realized they can get paid, all of the honesty seeped out of their videos. They built up the drama to get more views. They started hiring editors to make them look good. They started to advertise products that no one really needed. Whatever bond I felt to the lives that I had observed for so many years was broken. That rawness of human stories that I craved was gone. But I still craved it. That's when I started going to flea markets and buying abandoned home movies. What I found on those assorted VHS tapes and unlabeled DVDs was much better than anything I could hope for with YouTube. These people acted completely natural. The awkward pauses, the obvious annoyances, the grumpy people who didn't want to be on tape. It all made it so much easier to imagine that I was there. The fact that I didn't know I was watching made all the difference. Voyeurism, I know. That's what my girlfriend called it. She's my wife now, and she still calls it that. But what is marriage if not a descent into accepting your partner's quirks? She treats the dog like she's our daughter, and unless she starts breastfeeding, you won't hear me complain. My flea market bargain trips usually get an eye roll out of her, but there was never any yelling involved. As I pulled up the driveway, however, Laura was waving her arms around, yelling.
3 hours? Are you serious, Ryan? 3 hours out of the city for some stupid tapes?
Betty obediently stood by her, gazing up at her as if she was some Greek goddess, her little sausage tail wagging a bit when she saw me walk up the porch, but after a quick glance, she shook her head and looked back up at my wife. I was just a background character in that dog's life. I could have told Laura that all the markets around the city limits were taped out, that any unmarked tapes I could find around town usually ended up being recordings of movies from television with the advertisements still kept in. But I didn't. This wasn't about the tapes. What's wrong? I asked.
There's something broken in Betty's neck. I need to take her to the vet. And my husband decides to drive out to some cornfield and look for porn.
Laura hisses. The dog shook her head again and again. The tapes aren't porn. They're echoes of the therapist we stopped going to bounced around my skull. This was not the time nor the place for that argument. Something else wrong?
I couldn't find her passport. Every other bit of documentation I have, but I've looked all around the house and I can't find her passport.
Laura's anger gave way to fear. The dog shook its head again.
See? Look, there's something wrong with her neck.
I was going to ask her why the hell she thought she needed the dog's passport for a vet check, but I didn't. I just shrugged. I haven't seen it.
Well, I hope they take us without it,
she said, as if the chance for Betty's neck getting checked out without travel documents was slim to none.
I'll call you when I know what's wrong. Can you do the laundry? Left the whites by the machine. Just need to put them in.
Laura made her way to the car with the dog. Betty shook her head again.
God, I hope you're okay,
Laura whispered to her pet.
I'll need a glass of wine when we come back, she said to me.
My wife and her dog drove off. I was just about to close the washing machine when I noticed a pair of my red boxers peeking out from the pile of whites. When I took them out, I noticed Laura's blue university t-shirt. In my haste to get to my mysterious tape, I didn't check if the laundry was sorted. It wasn't. The sorting couldn't have taken longer than 2 minutes, and for 30 seconds I tried, but my eyes quickly drifted to the television in the corner of the basement. The prospect of sorting through my dirty laundry instead of indulging in someone else's seemed like torture. I'd turn on the tape, just to get a glimpse of what I was getting into. Then I'd go and do that thing my wife told me to do. Within seconds of turning on the VCR, I knew I wasn't going anywhere. The tape was exactly what I was craving. The timestamp in the lower right corner read June 14th, 1994. We were inside of a fancy house. Nice marble staircase and oil paintings of mildly inbred aristocrats filled the screen as the camera shook and bobbled around the wedding reception. Whoever was behind the lens had no idea what they were doing. The zoom and shake of the video made it barely watchable. It was perfect. I could imagine standing there among the fancily dressed guests, watching someone swing around a hulking piece of Sony in utter confusion. A group of children wearing miniature suits and dresses ran by the camera. The boys made faces and giggled. One girl in a yellow dress waved to the lens.
Jesus, Jessica, where were you? I've been looking for you.
A hushed female whisper cut through the hubbub of the reception. I jumped from my remote to turn up the volume.
I'm just recording stuff. Mary said she wanted to video it today,
Jessica replied as she zoomed in on a very old man staring out into the ether.
Well, there's a problem,
the other voice hissed.
What's wrong?
The crowd walked around the old man like he didn't exist. Jessica swung the camera around at a particularly uninteresting part of the carpet.
Mary's ex is here. He's freaking out at the gates, demanding they let him in. Is it Todd?
Jessica pronounced the word Todd with the same intonation one would pronounce terminal cancer.
I think so,
the other voice whispered.
She...
For a split second, I saw a pair of nervous clasped hands against a bright blue dress, but then the video cut out. Complete darkness. My phone dinged. They took us without the passport. Thank God. I ignored it and stared at the screen, hoping that another part of the story would flicker into existence. After a couple of waves of static, it did. A courtyard with a view of a stunning mountain range, in it, a bride and groom. The woman, a Venice of the 90s, the man, a chiseled jawline with too much gel in his hair. They were smiling at each other, but the camera was too far off to tell whether those smiles were genuine. In front of the possibly happy couple was an array of wooden chairs seating the guests of the wedding. Beneath their feet, a sea of sparkling calm gently swayed. A layer of crystal glass divided the family and friends from the pool below them. A man next to the camera kept on coughing. Someone next to him whispered something, but that didn't stop the coughs. The couple kept on looking at each other. Then the video cut out. The darkness of the screen dragged on. For a split second, I even considered getting the laundry out of the way, but just as I was about to reach into the washing machine for Laura's orange stockings, another image crackled to life on the screen. We were back in the courtyard, but it was in a considerably worse state. Cigarette stubs peeked out of the once impressive stone floor. Empty and sometimes broken bottles were all over the place, and where there was once a sea of calm, there was now the shell of a pool filled with broken furniture. Even smashed up with rough axe cuts, the dresses and chairs still looked expensive. It was evening, August 19th, 2002, and the groom from 8 years ago was wearing a dirty pink bathrobe. The man aged a couple of decades. His hair was gathered around his shoulders in thick, greasy clumps. A patchy beard of graying hair now covered his chiseled jawline. "You really hurt me," he said. A cigarette hissed in his mouth as a controlled madness burned in his eyes. "You changed me. I used to like people. I used to want to do something good in this world. I could have done some good in this world." The man bent down and produced a bottle off the floor. "But you hurt me. You hurt me so bad. I just want to see everything burn." The man continued ranting and raving, but as he walked away from the camera, his words fell to a static-filled whisper. I turned up the volume as loud as it would go, but the only thing I could hear was the chirping of crickets, intercut by a steady, bassy tone. Out of the mountains beyond the courtyard, there was a grouping of lit-up tents. A man was going quietly insane in a fancy house as people across the valley indulged in cheery techno music. I was watching someone go insane on a summer evening. The tape was better than anything I could have ever hoped for. The man in the bathrobe took a pull from the bottle, recoiled, and then smashed the thing against the mountain of furniture stacked in the pool. He screamed. I heard that part. "You ever talk about the fire with Todd? Ever talk about how much you wouldn't want to burn alive?" The man was back in front of the camera now. He was swaying from side to side, clearly off balance from whatever was in that bottle. "Of course you don't. All you two talk about is vapid bullshit. All you do is waste your stupid lives stuck in meaningless gossip that doesn't matter. Or you know what? You know what?" The man paused. A gentle gust of wind blew his filthy bathrobe apart, revealing far too much of his malnourished body. For a second, he tried to pull the flimsy bit of pink cloth back around his jagged ribcage, but with a frustrated sigh, he gave up on his drunken hands. Memories of wasted nights in high school filled my head. I remember how the world spun, how impossibly bright and quick all the headlights were as I stumbled my way back home, how difficult it was to stand upright with my blood full of booze. Once the blood is so far off in the deep end of the whiskey pool, there's only one way to momentarily regain balance. The man on the television squished his face into an effort-filled wink. For a blink, I was standing there, in his ratty flip-flops, watching the triple vision of the world focus into a singular blurry image. "I love you," he mumbled to himself. He tore his eye away from the camera and started down at his dying cigarette. "I love you. But I won't love you for long. No, I won't. Because I'll be dead. And you'll be dead. And he'll be dead. The world will burn." The man reached behind the camera and produced another cigarette, but he didn't light it. He studied the stick of tobacco for a bit and then put it behind his ear. "How much do you know about fire?" he asked, reaching down. "You don't know shit about fire," he hissed as he re-emerged off screen with a jerry can. "I've been reading my great-uncle's books. They said old Verniges was mad, but could a madman build all of this? Could a madman create an empire out of nothing? Could a madman?" He spilled a bit of the gasoline out of the can as he waved around his arms. This calmed him down somewhat. The madman's voice dropped to a whisper. The music across the valley slowed down to a steady, low heartbeat. "I've been reading Verniges' books, and I know more about fire than your feeble mind ever could," he started. The words that the man spoke came out in a controlled whisper, but the ideas that lingered in his monologue flickered with madness. Fire was not a tool that humanity discovered. It was a portal to another realm that our primitive ancestors had stumbled upon and were too simple to comprehend. He spoke of flames as if they were hands, as if the flashes of chemical energy that burst out of a bonfire were fingers from a different world that were desperately trying to claw themselves into our realm. My uncle warned of the power that existed in the fire. He spoke of Alexandria, of Peshtigo, of Bois de Cassier, of fires that ravaged humanity. But he spoke of them as if they were mistakes, as if we were lucky that the flames were put out. He was wrong. The man was a genius, but in this one essential thing, he faltered. Each time that the burning god emerged, humanity was given a chance of becoming pure, and they spit out the embers of freedom. Every time that the burning god's arrival was postponed, it was a tragedy. But even that tragedy could be brought to rest. He went over to the pool and started pouring gasoline on the broken-down furniture. As he poured, he spoke, but he was too far away from the camera's microphone. The music across the valley started to grow in tempo. The man started to punctuate his inaudible rant with manic shouts. "I will summon him," he shouted. With the techno music playing in the background, he sounded like a misguided DJ trying to hype up a tired dive bar. After the can ran dry, he produced another one and resumed pouring and rambling. The man might have emptied out his pool and filled it with chopped up furniture, but he was far off in the deep end. Less than half a year after I got out of university, I also got out of my first real relationship. 5 years of raw connection in the trash and unemployed to boot. I was desperate for any form of affirmation in my life. I bought dozens of pickup artist books that offered to teach me the secrets to making women want to sleep with me. Watching the broken man pour the gasoline all over the antique furniture, a part of me felt his pain. It was not that difficult to fall for a cult when your heart is broken. My phone dinged again. "There's something in Betty's ear. The doctor says not serious. She's such a trooper. Laundry done?" I barely looked away from the television. The man in the bathrobe was done with the pouring. He was back in front of the camera now. A cigarette dangled from his lips. He was thinking. Fear broke through the mania in his eyes. He turned around and looked at the festival across the valley. The sun had set by then, but bright lights flashed across the darkened sky from the music-filled tents. The man let out a desperate groan. For a second, it looked as if he would walk away from the fire to be, as if he would give up on whatever ritual he was trying to perform. But before he could give up, his right hand flew through the air. He slapped himself, dropping his cigarette. After he picked it up, he slapped himself again. "I will summon him," he screamed at the camera, and he lit up his smoke. "And he will burn the world." He took one long puff of his cigarette and threw it into the pool. For a moment, he simply stood there, a man in a filthy bathrobe with dark mountains stretching out before him. He looked at peace. He screamed. He screamed in a way that I didn't think it was possible for a grown man to scream. He screamed and ran through the courtyard, burning. He spun in place like a wounded animal, shedding his bathrobe. But as the flames behind him started to consume the furniture, his body propelled him away from the inferno. Screeching and limping, the man ran towards the camera. He knocked it over in his escape, but it kept recording. The fire soon drowned his agonizing cries out. Only his burning bathrobe remained. Out across the valley, the tents lit up with another color, a flash of blue and red. For a couple beats of the far-off techno, I could see the siren lights traveling down the mountain road, but the flames quickly cut off my line of sight. My phone dinged again. I didn't look at it. I was so enthralled in the video that I had started chewing on my shirt collar. Haven't done that since I was 8. The flames reached out into the night sky like clawed fingers, then grasped at oxygen, growing, roaring, demanding more. The fire spread throughout the screen. I tilted my head sideways to see better. The inferno beckoned to me. I was on my feet, staring into the television. It was as if the fire was calling for me, pulling me in, demanding that I join it in that crackling universe of energy. In the cool air of my basement, I felt warmth. I reached out for the television.
You should have seen the size of the thing they pulled out of her ear. We need to be careful when we let her run into the... Ryan? Ryan, what are you doing?
Laura stood on the stairs. Betty squeezed herself past and gave my calf a lick before jumping on the couch. My eyes shifted towards the open washing machine. Her gaze followed mine.
You didn't do the laundry. Great. Absolutely great. Come on, Ryan. We talked about this. I don't ask for a lot. I just want...
It took me a second to realize she stopped talking. As she spoke, my eyes drifted back towards the screen. Out in that burning hellscape, I could see something move. I could see a beak. 2 orbs of blue flame stared back at me. I tore my attention away from the eldritch god and back towards my wife.
Sorry. What are you watching?
She walked down the last couple of steps with a controlled anger that crackled as soon as she saw what was on the television.
Jesus Christ, Ryan, what the hell are you watching?
It's, some guy was going through a bad divorce, I think, so he tried to set the world on fire. Burned himself in the process, and now there's... As hot as the inferno on the screen was, her icy stare cut through me. She inhaled sharply, turning her words into cold steel.
That shit belongs in an evidence locker, not our house.
Laura stomped her way up the stairs, with Betty barely making it past the door before she slammed it. I turned my attention back towards the screen. Whatever presence I saw hiding in the fire was gone now. The flames still tore through the sky with animalistic fervor, but the beast's eyes were gone. The fire roared on for a couple of minutes until its thunderous cry turned into a hiss. A burst of water was softening the flames. Soon enough, firefighters were talking about how they wished they could have stayed at the festival. As they sprayed water over the gasoline-filled pool, one of them proceeded to give a 5-paragraph essay's worth of description of a redhead bartender he once saw in the 90s. I thought about rewinding the tape, about going back to that moment where I saw those burning balls of light hiding in a storm of bristling energy. But I decided against it. Upstairs, I could hear a cork getting angrily pulled out of a wine bottle. I sorted through the washing machine, turned it on, and went to get a glass of wine. "I'm sorry," I said. She was on the porch, puffing on a cigarette with one hand and scratching Betty behind the ear with the other. She didn't look at me as she spoke. "You can't keep on doing this, Ryan. This isn't about the laundry. This is about you not being reliable. You can't just drop everything to indulge in your voyeurism." I tried to remember all 3 parts of the 3-part apology thing that our therapist kept on rambling about back in the day. "I'm sorry for not being reliable, sometimes acting like a child. I'll try to do better next time." Her lack of yelling made me reconsider therapy for a split second. "So, Betty okay now?" The dog wagged her tail at the mention of her name. "Oh, yeah, she was a real trooper. Held still for the doc, shook a bit, but didn't move her head at all. Everyone in the lobby kept on saying how cute she is." Asking about Betty would always get Laura talking. We finished off the bottle of wine, watched some shitty reality TV show, made love, and now Laura is sleeping on my chest. Betty's curled up at our feet and seems to be having a dream that involves a lot of biting and running. There's a nice summer breeze outside. I should sleep. The thought of going back to the basement and rewinding the tape was there as soon as we finished the wine, but Laura wanted to watch some scripted reality TV show about hot people looking for love on a beach, and I figured I'd be a good partner and indulge with her. The question of the sentient inferno disappeared during our own little fiery bout of passion, but now that we're post-coital and cuddled up, I can't let go of the memory of those hungry claws. She's a light sleeper, so if I move, she'll wake up and be disappointed. And I don't want to disappoint her. She might have a weird relationship with the dog and a horrible taste in entertainment, but I'd probably be burning furniture without her. Maybe she's right. Maybe the video does belong in some evidence locker instead of our basement. All of this bouncing around my head, and I can't get any sleep. So I figured I'd come to this little insomniac corner of the internet and vent for a bit. I'm torn between the mystery of what that desperate man brought into our world and being a decent husband. My wife just mumbled something about how I should go to sleep. I think the light from my phone is keeping her up. I think I should just go to sleep.
Trick or treat? Don't look under the sheet. The same boy has been coming to my house every Halloween for 4 years. He wears the same ridiculous costume every year. A ratty, blank, off-white tablecloth that hangs much too low off his body, scraping the dirt with poorly scribbled hollow black circles for eyes. The appearance isn't quite memorable by itself, only in the quality and character and the way it moved. I saw him every year, comes across the lawn just as the sun set behind the hill, bathing our house in an ominous violet shadow, moving towards me, but never seeming to demonstrate any actual steps forward. It was so bizarre, inhuman sensation, one that I never quite grew accustomed to, moving, but unmoving, crossing ground like he was being pulled along by a string. There was something else, too. Something I noticed on our first meeting 4 years ago when I held out our plastic Rite Aid jack-o'-lantern bucket and watched as the sheep came forward where a hand should have been, removed a portion of its treats, and buried them under that drab cloth. He smelled. It was a unique stench. Wet mud, a spoiled milk, raw meat left on the counter. Putrid, nauseating, indescribable mostly, except that I never forgot it. It was there, always there when that boy visited each Halloween. It lingered too, for hours, even after he left, like it poisoned the very air around him. It was always the same, every time, every Halloween. Except for last year. I haven't been able to tell anyone. Not until today. Not even my wife. She doesn't care much about Halloween. She doesn't like to see the kids anymore. Not since our son died. She stays downstairs until it's over. I don't think she knows about any of it. Last year, curiosity got the better of me. I did something that I shouldn't have. I was ready for the boy that day. I waited. I watched. I knew when he would arrive, the perilous, rolling black dusk where the world seemed to stop and anything was possible. He came, just as he always did, just as a dead chill came down from the hill and shrieked against our house. He crossed the yard, motionless, as he always was, his tattered cloth unmoving. I opened the door and smiled, happy to see my silent friend, wildly anxious to finally discover what could have possibly been underneath that strange fabric all of these years. I thrust the bucket in front of me like some sort of offering. When it moved, I moved faster. I grabbed the sheet, right at the crown of the head, and pulled down, wrenching it free in a violent swirl. She didn't move. She didn't try to hide. It was my wife, wearing my dead son's clothes, wearing my dead son's skin. Her face was blank except the worms, dozens of them, pale, greedily snaking through her horrible decayed cheeks and forehead. She didn't seem to recognize me, or didn't seem to care. I stood paralyzed, watching as she took the candy, replacing the sheet, and left. I haven't told my wife about any of it, and I hope she doesn't hear about this. I don't think she knows.
A couple months ago, I, 19 female at the time, met quite the charmer at my local Dollar Tree. I'm shopping for some cleaning supplies and keeping to myself. I don't enjoy interacting with strangers if I don't have to, so I do my best to keep out aisles that are occupied. A young man approaches me, who looks to be in his mid-20s. I don't like to judge a book by its cover, but you could tell how skeezy this dude was by the look on his face. Middle school mustache, raised eyebrow, and a shit-eating grin, as if he already had my phone number. I looked pretty disheveled myself after being showered and walking in the heat to run errands. It's pretty clear I'm not open for conversation. He opens anyways by asking me my name. I reply, keeping my gaze at anything but him. He follows up with my absolute favorite game, Guess My Race. He's complimenting me on my complexion and figure, saying how I was an X, Y, or Z based on my features. I thank him awkwardly and attempt to exit the very one-sided conversation. He invites me to his house. I decline. I tell him I have a boyfriend. He invites me as friends. Again, I politely decline and finish my shopping. As I go to check out, I see that he's bothering another girl with the same routine. Of course, he gets turned down again. Once I leave, I notice he's still behind me and trying to grab my attention. A little odd, but nothing out of the ordinary for cat collar types. He smiles at me and asks if I'd like a ride. I decline several more times, and finally he leaves, or so I thought. He pulls up next to me in his truck and asks me again if I had a ride anywhere, all while throwing in the occasional compliment or pet name. I tell him that I am fine to walk and to have a nice day. At this point, I'm becoming more than annoyed. I'm getting creeped out. For reference, I don't own a car. My house is only half a mile away, but I feel like forever at this point, and I am far too shy to tell him to fuck off. This was the last he spoke to me. Now he was just following me. He made circles around the parking lot as I walked out. He followed me down the sidewalk. He even drove the same street twice, just so he could make sure he didn't miss that turn I was making. I gave him the benefit of the doubts. Perhaps he was lost. He was staring every single time. After several minutes, it was clear that he was targeting me. I did not want this guy to know where I live. It's possible that I was overly paranoid due to a history of bad experiences, though something in my gut was saying that this guy wasn't your average douche. I called my boyfriend and told him I was being followed. I asked if he'd stay on the phone with me until I got home. The guy prowling must have thought I was calling the police, but he quickly stopped staring and drove the other direction. I am no stranger to catcalling and flirting, nor are many women, but this situation rubbed me the wrong way. Hi, so this is my first post in the sub. This happened recently and I still can't fully wrap my mind around it and just wanted to share. I wanted to post this in Let's Not Read, but the mods denied it, so I posted it here. For context, I'm a college student and I live in the city alone. I'm particularly close to the US-Mexico border, so human trafficking is unfortunately common here and something I'm very aware of. Last week I decided to make a cinnamon rolls. I realized I didn't have any frosting, but it was like 7 something in the evening and kind of light outside, so I didn't feel nervous about running to the store to grab some. I was wearing a t-shirt, baggy sweats, and Crocs. This will be important later. For anyone that doesn't know, there's essentially 2 ways to wear Crocs. 1 with the strap on top of your foot, which is more casual, or 2 with the strap behind your heel, which is more secure. I always wear them with the strap on top of my foot because they're just barely too tight the other way, which makes it uncomfortable. As I was walking down the stairs to the parking garage in my building, I had this thought in my head. You should flip the strap down on your shoes in case you need to run. I immediately thought that was weird because, like I said, I never wear them like that. And why the hell would I need to run? I argued with myself mentally for a minute, but as I got in my car, I decided to flip it anyways. In the store's parking garage, there are 3 ways to get into the store. A sliding door with a ramp escalator, usually locked by 6 to 7. Number 2, an elevator. Number 3, exit the garage, walk around the block, and enter the front door. I usually go to the ramp, but since it was locked, I parked near the elevator. I also parked with a few of those big cement poles on my left, so no one could park in that side of me and pull me into a car or something. I walked over to the elevator, pushed the button, and all the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. The elevator was really slow, so I had a second to process and try to figure out why I suddenly felt so panicked. Also, I was trying to convince myself that I was crazy and that there's nothing wrong. I looked to my right and saw a car driving kind of fast. There were dents and paint chips all over it, and the front headlight was smashed. The panicked feeling was screaming at me at this point, and I really believe they stopped behind me, but my gut told me I needed to run. I am decently athletic, but I am not a runner. I don't know what gave me the power to run as fast as I did, but I ran all the way out of the parking garage and around the block to the front of the store. I could hear their tires screeching through the garage, but I didn't stop or turn around. I was shaking like a leaf by the time I got in, but didn't want to go to my car because whoever that was could obviously just follow me home. I saw them fly past the front of the store and finally I felt safe. I assumed they were gone. I walked a few laps through the aisles trying to collect myself, grabbing the frosting and checked out. The entire time I was in the store, kept trying to logically explain what had just happened. Maybe the guy was in the passenger side was injured, and that's why they were coming so close to the elevator. Maybe they needed to ask me a question. Maybe they think I'm absolutely psychotic for breaking into a Sprint in the middle of the parking garage. But why did I hear screeching tires? I tried walking towards the elevator to go back to the garage, telling myself I'm insane for being so scared. The panic feeling came back in my stomach, and even stronger, to the point that I felt nauseous. I worked up the courage to ask the security guard to walk me to my car. I'm a really shy person, so asking a stranger for help isn't something I'm likely to do. He agreed and was very nice and helpful. We went down the elevator and made small talk. He could tell I was scared and told me, if you ever need anything, what does he working and who works the days he's not. As we started out of the elevator, the car from earlier was now parked diagonally in front of me, blocking me in. When they saw the security guard, they took off, and I haven't seen that car since. I don't know why they were waiting for me. Part of me am still trying to come up with some sort of justification as to why they did that. But all I know is that whatever told me to fix my shoes in case I needed to run was right, and I'm never going back to that store again. This happened about 5 years ago when I was a sophomore in college. I lived in a shitty apartment complex with 2 friends. Each building was 3 floors and had 12 units, and the doors to those buildings swung freely. It did not require a key for access. We lived on the 2nd floor. I remember one weekend, the place being pretty empty. It was the summer, so population in the college town was already small at that time. Both my roommates were back home visiting family, and a good chunk of the apartment tenants were gone, as there were hardly any cars in the spots outside my building. It was late at night. I can't remember if I had been somewhere near sleep when this happened, or if I awoke to it laughing. Soft laughing coming from outside my apartment door. I was completely alert, listening as hard as I could. I didn't hear any doors open, so it did not seem like it was a neighbor coming home. A minute or so of silence passed, so I decided it was safe enough to investigate. As quietly as I could, I got out of bed and tiptoed to the door. I pressed my eye against the peephole. A few seconds later, I saw a figure pass in the hallway and I jumped. My breath caught in my throat. A man was out there, just walking back and forth. I watched him through the peephole for a few minutes, completely silent. He mostly paced, but a few times he stopped abruptly and seemed to stare something, captivated, then continued. I remember his eyes so distinctly. Wide as hell and pitch black. They rolled around in his head when he paced, but when he stood, they would focus on seemingly nothing. I thought about just ignoring him and trying to go to sleep. He wasn't hurting anyone really, and I was safe behind my door. I just about slowly and quietly creep away from the door and back to my mom's, when all of a sudden this man threw himself at my door, pressed his eye up to the peephole, and sang, "I see you." I never moved so quickly in my life. I felt like I took 2 giant steps and was suddenly back in my room and under the covers like I was a little kid. From my room, I could hear him banging on the doors and walls. He shook the railing on the stairs. He laughed again. I laid in bed shaking, conflicted about what to do next. I called my dad first, waking up my parents and whispering what had happened. For numerous reasons, I didn't want to call the police, but my dad convinced me to at least phone the non-emergency line and tell them what happened. He had stopped making noise at this point, but I was so terrified to make any attempt to look out the peephole again. My door was pretty rock solid and had a deadbolt, so I couldn't imagine him forcing it open. My door was pretty thick, solid, and had a deadbolt, so I couldn't imagine him forcing it up. Deciding just to put on a headache show, put on headphones, and force myself to sleep. I don't know if the police showed up, and if they did, whether or not they saw this crazed man in my building. I moved out of the apartment after living there for only a year, and thankfully my next building had locks on the exterior doors.
Everybody knew old Miss Robbins was a vampire. Our parents said that we were just being paranoid, but we had evidence. The first piece of evidence was that she almost never left the house, and never during the daytime. The second piece of evidence was that she always dressed in black. The most compelling piece of evidence was that Billy Adkins said he saw her watching the sunrise on her porch one time, and when the sun came up, she clutched her chest and ran inside. It hadn't been so bad at first, having a vampire in the neighborhood. We knew that we were safe in the daytime, and we'd be locked in our houses at night. And everybody knows that a vampire can't come in unless you invite it. But then Miss Robbins began to venture out of the house more often. She'd only go out at night, and she'd only go as far as the lawn. She did the same thing every time. She'd stand there, staring out into the night, not moving. Then slowly, she'd reach into her pocket and pull out her keys, rattling them with a back and forth motion of the wrist, as if she were playing with an invisible baby. Sometimes she'd stay until the sun came up, and then she'd clutch her chest and run inside. This went on for a couple of weeks, and then she started getting closer to the street. First, she was 15 feet away. A few nights later, she was 10. And then she was 5. And every night, she rattled the keys harder, until the neighbor's dog began to bark at her. But old Miss Robbins didn't pay the dog any mind. She just stood there, rattling her keys. That's when Billy Adkins came up with the mission. We'd sneak into Miss Robbins' apartment at night and get a picture of her coffin. All vampires sleep in a coffin, Billy said, and if we can get a picture of it, then our parents will have to believe us. It sounded logical. We drew straws to see who would be the one to sneak into Miss Robbins' house while she was out rattling her keys. And, of course, I drew the shortest one. The next night, while Miss Robbins was on her lawn, I snuck in behind her. It wasn't hard. She left the front door wide open. As I stepped over the threshold, I noted that the place had an oppressive air to it. It was stiffingly hot and smelled like mothballs. I held my phone clutched tight in my sweaty hand as I scanned the living room for the coffin. There was no sign of it, but then I guess there wouldn't be. My best bet would be to check the bedroom. I forced myself down the hall, each footstep feeling as if it weighed 1,000 pounds. I pushed the door to the bedroom open, and it gave a loud creak. I whipped my head around to see if Miss Robbins had heard me, but I didn't hear any footsteps, so I guessed I was safe. There was no coffin in the bedroom either. Maybe it was in the basement. I found the entry to the basement in the laundry room. The door was old and the paint was peeling off of it. I felt sweat beating up on my forehead as I stared at the door. I couldn't tell if it was nerves or just the heat. I pushed the door open and switched on the flashlight on my phone, but it only lit about halfway down the staircase. I took a hesitant step down, and that's when I heard the front door close, following by thudding footsteps. I couldn't run. My only chance was to hide. I closed the door to the basement as quietly as I could and started down the steps. But there must have been a missing step, because my foot found only air and I tumbled headlong rest of the way down. My phone screen shattered, but the flashlight was still on. I swept the beam of light around the room, and it landed on something shiny. A shelf full of glass jars. The jars were filled with a murky green liquid. and each one had something floating in it. As my eyes focused in the dim light, I saw what was inside the glass jars. A scream gathered in my throat, but came out as a whimper. The whimper was loud enough, however, for Miss Robbins to hear me. The basement door was flung open, and light poured into the room. "Who's there?" Miss Robbins called out. My head whipped this way and that as I scanned the walls for another exit, but there was only one way out, and Miss Robbins was standing between me and it. Miss Robbins swung her flashlight beam over me, and I was blinded as the light washed out my vision. I dropped to my knees. "Please," I said, "please don't kill me." I heard a click, and the overhead light of the basement came on. I dared not to look to my right, where I knew the jars of human remains were. "So you've found my children," Miss Robbins said, giving me a hard look. "I won't tell anybody," I said. "I swear." "I'd prefer that you didn't," Miss Robbins replied, "but you're not in any danger." She walked over to the jars and sighed as she rested a hand on one of them. She shook her head. "These were the only children I ever had," she said, "but none of them ever made it out alive." I looked at the shelf of jars again, and I realized that they were fetuses, not children. In the dark, they had seemed much larger. "Come on, boy," Miss Robbins said. "Have a cup of tea with me, and I won't tell your parents that you snuck in here." Miss Robbins turned and walked up the stairs without waiting for my response, and after a moment's hesitation, I followed her. I sat on Miss Robbins' old red corduroy couch as she put the kettle on, and a couple minutes later, we were both sipping rose petal tea out of delicate china glasses. I noticed that Miss Robbins' hand shook as she lifted the cup to her mouth. "Miss Robbins?" "Yes, boy?" "You said those were your children." Miss Robbins shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "That's right," she said. "How come they came out like that, all twisted up and deformed?" Miss Robbins finished for me. My face flushed red, and Miss Robbins sighed. "Are your parents good to you, boy?" she asked. "Yeah, I guess so," I replied. "Well, my father wasn't good to me and my sisters," she said. "He hurt something awful. He messed my insides up, and years later, when I wanted to have kids, they all came out like that." "I'm sorry," I said. "Me too," she replied. I stared into my teacup for a few minutes before speaking up again. "Miss Robbins," I said. "Yes, boy?" "You said you had a sister." "Yes," she said, frowning. "I had 3. Now I've got 1. How come she never visits you?" I asked. Miss Robbins shook her head. "I shouldn't tell you any of this," she said, "but I guess if you ask an old codger like me a question, they'll tell you their whole life story. I guess it's because the world forgets about us old people. So when someone wants to talk to us, we can't shut up." She took another shaky-handed sip of her tea and continued. "This is the house I grew up in," she said. "All of my sisters moved away and lived their lives, but I could never leave this place. Back when I was a girl, they didn't have a name for that. Now they call it agoraphobia. Do you know what that is, boy?" I shook my head. "It means I can't go outside," she said. "Too much open space, too much noise, and too many people. It's suffocating to me. I can make it as far as the lawn some nights, but then the daylight comes and the world opens up, and I've got to come back inside." "But you've been going outside every single night," I said. "I've seen you." "So I have," she replied. She stared into her tea with a troubled look on her face. My sister is dying, she said. They say she's still got a few months left, but it's my last chance to see her before she goes. Why do you rattle your keys? They're my car keys, and anything I hold these days rattles. But I'm fooling myself. I haven't driven that car in over 10 years. Even if I could make it there, it probably wouldn't start. Huh? I said. We just thought you were a vampire. Miss Robbins snorted in her tea. You what? She said. Well, you only ever come out at night, and Billy said that meant you were a vampire. To my surprise, Miss Robbins began to laugh. I suppose that makes more sense than someone being afraid of the outside, she said. Well, sure. Everybody's heard of vampires, but I don't think anybody knows what agoraphobia is. Agoraphobia, Miss Robbins said, a soft smile lighting her face. Right, I replied. But Miss Robbins, yes? How can anybody be afraid of the outside? Miss Robbins' lips creased into a frown. Well, she said, if there's one thing I've learned in life, it's that living in fear is like standing under an avalanche. If you don't move out of the way, the snow just keeps piling on you higher and higher, and eventually you get so deep that you can never dig your way out. It's a shame you're not a vampire, I said. Why's that? Well, if you were a vampire, you wouldn't have to be afraid. I don't think there's anything in the outside tougher than a vampire. Billy says that vampires can't go in the sunlight, but I figured that they could just wear sunblock. Miss Robbins smiled. Yes, she said. I suppose they could. I went home not long after, but that wasn't the last time I had tea at Miss Robbins' place. Once we knew she wasn't a vampire, me and the other kids started to stop by sometimes. She would make us rose petal tea with honey in it, and to this day, I've never had anything that tasted so good. The very last time I went to Miss Robbins' house, she wasn't there. Instead, there was a note on the door that simply read, I've decided to be a vampire. Her car was gone, and our parents said that she had moved out to the Midwest to be with her sister. She died out there a few years later after her sister did. I only knew Miss Robbins for a short time, but I've never forgotten her. Every time I am too afraid to do something that I really want to do, I remind myself of Miss Robbins and how she decided to be a vampire.
Halloween is the best holiday of the year. No, not because of sweets and costumes, though the outfits that some people come up with are really something, but because of the excitement. Everyone is anticipating the coming holidays, no one more so than yours truly. You see, I'm a pumpkin farmer. It's sort of a tradition at this point. Each generation has improved and upgraded the business, making it grow bigger and better every time. This year, it's my go. I spent the last 2 years on this plan now, and it's gonna make the biggest, best pumpkin patch you'll ever see. You see, my invention is a seed, but not just any seed. I made them so that all they need to grow is a little soil, and they'll be growing faster than a weed and manure. My pumpkins will be the best in town. No one will stand a chance. Currently, it's Halloween night, and I'm waiting to try out my babies. That is what they are at this point. I spent so long loving them and nurturing them. I wait in my house for the first visitor to arrive. I hear the doorbell and go to open the door. I'm met by a lone girl, about 16 or 17. She's dressed in a short cheerleader dress, covered in blood. Fake. I know real blood when I see it. And currently trying to discreetly hide the cigarette she has smoking. Trick or treat, she says, looking completely bored out of her mind. I smile at her, but she doesn't react. Instead, holding out her hand, obviously gesturing for sweets. My smile doesn't falter as I give her a single chocolate piece, nor when she huffs in annoyance and struts down my garden path, stopping only to flick her half-lit cigarette into my flower bed and eat the piece of chocolate I gave her. It doesn't falter when she starts to choke and turns around in horror and confusion, showing the large, pumpkin-sized lump in her stomach, slowly growing larger and larger with each terrified breath she takes. When she collapses on the ground, the pumpkin having finally ruptured her stomach and torn through her skin, I smile wider. My baby's worked wonderfully. I turn to go back inside my house, but out of the corner of my eye, I see a young boy walking up the path, candy bag in tow, completely oblivious to the corpse just feet away from him, hidden under a sea of vines and an island of pumpkin, smiling just as happy as I am. It seems I had another walking bag of soil up for grabs. I hold up my chocolate, my babies, excitement building as I imagine how big this pumpkin patch will be. Halloween really is the best holiday of the year. Thomas hated Halloween. It's a combination of everything he disliked: crowds, darkness, and fake monsters. Fake monsters were the worst though, because how do you even know if it's fake? There was one silver lining to the day he dreaded: candy. Tommy could never resist the sweet treats. Since his mother never passed them out or anything to the neighborhood children, going house to house was the only option. After finally finding the courage to go trick-or-treating, he started down the street. The pumpkin costume his mother had stuffed him into was a bit tight, but he waddled persistently. It didn't take long to fill the bottom of the plastic pumpkin with licorice and jawbreakers. Most of the houses just left the lights on without adding any extra decorations in their yard. Those were the places he felt more comfortable approaching, but they never seemed to be giving away anything good. With searching eyes, Tommy noticed the strobe light of a home not too far away. The place seemed to have a decent amount of money, according to their display. Tommy's shaky legs dragged him slowly towards the house. As he approached the yard, he could make out more than an impressive scene. At the front gate, barbed wire was weaved around the archway. At least 3 different types of strobe lights flashed brightly, giving everything an old movie effect. To the left of the large tree stood something that took the breath out of Tommy's mouth. The decorative creature stood at least 2 stories high. Its stretched, pale green flesh shone in the moonlight. The twiggish body ended with a rotting pumpkin head. Its face pointed downwards at its vine-like fingers. The appendages held a mannequin child about the same age as Tommy. The child's torso was ripped down the middle in a grotesque fashion. At the creature's feet laid full-size candy bars and fake blood. Fake monsters. Tommy heard a voice in his head remind him of the fact. Despite that, his heart was still thundering loudly in his pudgy chest. A neighborhood kid's laugh broke in the distance and snapped him from his frightened trance. Fake monsters, he told himself, and started walking towards the scattered treasure. Fake monsters, he kept reminding himself. The thing's legs not far away. Then Tommy suddenly remembered something. He turned around, back towards his home, and could barely see it in the distance. He looked back at his shoes, just as a thought broke. Why didn't he recognize these decorations? Before terror finally set in, a body fell in front of his feet. The corpse splattered blood across the orange outfit. A scream had barely left his mouth when the world was ripped out from under him. The vines wrapped around his body, then began to rip. Thomas's last comprehensible thought was that he heard talking in the distance. Let's check out that house. They gotta have good stuff. Unless you're scared. Then the fake monster tore open his body. 2 days after Christmas, and no great stir was through the house. The done-to-death holiday tales were coming to an end, thankfully. I waited for the tales of killer snowmen and invaders who aren't Santa Claus to fade away from the internet's craving eye. Everyone was at work or gone home, and it was just me and my computer, which is why I want to regale the web with yet another holiday tale. I have a neighbor, a strange old cross-eyed man who we'll call Mr. Halloween. He's harmless, I think. The neighborhood I live in, despite being a rough town, is very peaceful. Only once has a house been robbed here, and when the perpetrators were caught, they were found in the cells completely burned to death. Strange noises emanate from Mr. Halloween's house the night it happened. I don't know how he got that nickname, Mr. Halloween. Maybe it's because he's a spooky guy, but no one knows his real name. My parents don't talk about him. Kids stay away from his house. I often chance a hello in the mornings, and he'll just look at me with his emerald eyes and a grunt. That's okay though, because I'm neighborly, and someone interacts with the old man, everyone wins. What's strange to me is that on Christmas night, every year there's a great commotion about his house. Generally I just ignore it, but this year I chanced to look through his curtains. All I saw through his window was him dressed in his Sunday best in the living room of his house, talking to someone. The next night, as I wake up at 3 a.m., someone tries to break in. I saw them try to pry the door, and then I saw a pentagram light up in Mr. Halloween's living room. There is a blood-curdling scream, and the would-be burglar went up in flames. I think Mr. Halloween knows that I saw what happened. I also think he knows that I'm quite grateful. I don't mind it and no one knows. What's wrong with your friendly neighborhood Satanist?
In the town of Dellen, where it's always cozy and nice, we never celebrate Halloween. Each year on the 31st of October, our streets turn eerily quiet as nobody likes to give the impression that it is a day of importance. You'll not hear the laughter of children going trick-or-treating. There is no anticipation of finding the scariest costume, and there will not be deadly decorations on any of the suburban houses. It goes even as far that we are strictly forbidden to mention the holiday out loud. Now, don't get me wrong, we do enjoy autumn. Dellen is quite beautiful during the season. Bright brown and red leaves embellish the streets with the occasional cracked up chestnut in between. The air is just cold enough to make your breath visible. When you walk through the streets, the smell of fire rising from the individual chimneys makes you long for the warmth of your home. We enjoy autumn. We simply skip and don't acknowledge what the rest of the country gets ready for when the calendar reads October. When I was even younger than now, I never understood what was so terribly bad about this holiday as to forbid it altogether. The people in our town weren't particularly religious or conservative in any way. We celebrated every other holiday in the most cheerful manner, and I could even swear I once found a photo of my own mother dressed like a skeleton. It seemed unfair to me that apparently there was a time in which they enjoyed the season fully. Now, it was the dullest time of the year. When I secretly watched a Halloween movie while my parents were away, I would get incredibly frustrated, as it was plainly obvious that Dellen had the perfect atmosphere for the season. And the atmosphere only got more fitting when the pumpkins arrived. Well, they didn't simply arrive overnight, even if it almost feels that way. Their seeds must have been planted months ago, everywhere in the neighborhood where there was any soil to grow. In front yards of homes, on the grass inside the roundabouts, and of course, on the fields near the school. Everywhere you went, you could see the green plants making their way out of the dirt. At first, We weren't entirely sure what exactly was growing there. Nobody minded though. It was rather nice to see all this green as the weather slowly became colder, and then finally, the first hints of orange were showing. Tiny little pumpkins getting bigger each day. There were probably a dozen showing from the window of our kitchen alone. You know, in my time, pranks looked a little different than that. My father laughed as we both looked outside on the first morning of October. You think it was a prank? Now, I haven't heard of the neighborhood committee planning anything like this, so I assume it was some bored teenagers. Were you possibly involved, Charlie? He winked at me. I shook my head. I kinda like it though. Maybe we could bring one inside, I carefully asked. There was nothing wrong with pumpkins after all. We had used them before for soup or pie, though they never looked quite like these. Usually, Dad would get butternut squash or those green ones. The one I had my eyes on, however, had just the perfect size and form for carving a nasty face inside. Of course, I couldn't mention my intentions to my parents. Maybe we could make some pie late. I stopped speaking as I felt a cold touch on my shoulder. It was my mom's hand. Her face even looked paler than usual, and she had a worried look in her eyes. She had been so silent, I didn't even hear her approach. "They are multiplying," she whispered. Dad chuckled a little. "Susie, they're just pumpkins. They've been growing for a while now. It has nothing to do with..." He stopped speaking as the ice-cold stare of my mother instructed him to. She shook her head and seemed all warm and friendly again. "Come on, honey. You should get going. School's about to start." Pumpkins became the #1 conversation item in our town. Some neighbors were wary of the so-called prank, just like my mother, perhaps as it reminded them of the forbidden holiday. Most, however, seemed delighted by the gift of autumn. It didn't take long until the first ones started to harvest the pumpkins before they would start to ripen and mold. Miss Finley, the old lady that lived opposite to us, had taken all the ones that were growing in front of her house. When she opened the door, a sweet smell would escape, and her porch was decorated with different sized pumpkins. I begged my mother to do the same. We didn't even have to carve them, but every time I even brought up the subject, her face would darken and she would distract from the subject. Dad had given up as well, and so we started ignoring the pumpkins. My parents stopped caring about the subject altogether, or so it seemed, but it wasn't just our street that had turned full of them. They were all around our little town. Restaurants started using the flesh of the vegetable in new dishes. There were hot and even cold drinks created with them. And the small candy store in town even started making pumpkin caramels. They were omnipresent. I didn't want to disobey my mother. For some reason, this whole situation was turning her a little strange, and she was even more strict than usual. Still, those were only pumpkins. They had nothing to do with Halloween, and I had a hard time going along with her weird and illogical ways. At home, I would not speak of it, but I happily accepted the candy sample me and my friend Ben got from the candy maker. It was unbelievably good. We even got some pumpkin biscuits at the bakery on our way back from school. As unusual as it sounds, a part of me believed that maybe they would have an effect on me. Maybe something awful would happen to me, but of course, none of that came true. They were only pumpkins after all. I felt just as healthy and happy. My stomach was simply a little bit fuller. However, while I couldn't sense any difference in myself, there sure was something changing on our streets. I noticed the first time at night. It must have been past 2 a.m. when there was rattling noises coming from just outside my window. Next thing, I suddenly heard steps, accompanied by quiet laughter and giggling. My body and mind were heavy from sleep, and so it took me a moment to realize I was not dreaming. My body froze at the unusual sounds, but I told myself it had to be some drunk kids stumbling back home. Although our street was normally so quiet that you'd hear your own breath, I slowly opened an eye and I could swear I saw some light outside. It looked warm and bright, as if there were candles lit up. I closed my eyes again and told myself to go back to sleep, but I was too curious at that point. I climbed out of bed and tiptoed towards the window, making sure to stay down low. I peeked outside, but was surprised to see nobody on the streets. The only light was coming from the opposite side of the street, Miss Finley's home. I found it quite unusual that she was awake at this time of night, but then I noticed that she wasn't inside. She was hunched down in our front yard with a knife in her hand. She was cutting off a pumpkin, the one I had my eyes on the other day, and then out of nowhere, she moved her head up to where I was standing. I was inside a dark room. There was no way she saw me, but I could swear I felt her eyes piercing through me. I always found Miss Finley rather scary. She was mean and used to shout at me and my friends whenever we played outside. This was a whole new experience, however. I quickly ducked down and crawled back to bed. I closed my eyes and tried to forget what I just witnessed. I didn't speak to my parents about what had happened and told myself it had been nothing but a strange dream. I almost forgot about it until there was a ring at the door. Without thinking, I went to the front door and opened the door, only to be greeted by the yellow smile of Miss Finley herself. In her hands, she was holding a hot pumpkin pie. "Hello, dear. I was baking all morning and thought I'd bring you some. It fits the season, doesn't it?" she said and winked at me. I didn't know what to respond, but luckily my mother had appeared behind me. "Oh, what a lovely pie, Miss Finley, though that wasn't necessary at all. You see, I'm actually quite allergic to pumpkin, but thank you." She had her hand on the door, ready to close it. I could tell my mom was trying to be polite, but she seemed even more freaked out than me. Maybe she had seen the same thing as me last night. "Oh, nonsense. Let your child and husband enjoy it," she promptly responded. The pie did smell amazing, sweet, and with just a dash of cinnamon. My mother hesitated, but Miss Finley handed the tray over with such determination she had no other chance than to accept. She then turned around and walked back to her home without another word. Mom shut the door and walked to the kitchen with the pie. She opened the trash can and threw it away. "Do not talk to that woman again. Understood?" she said towards me. I nodded. "Mom, what the hell is going on? I saw her last night outside. What did you see? Was it just her, or did you see anyone else?" she almost shouted. "Mom, what's going on? It was just her, getting a pumpkin." My mother sighed and tried to smile, but half her face was twitching. "From now on, and until November begins, you'll not leave this house when the sun goes down. Understood? I'm gonna drive to the shop and get some supplies. Stay here and wait for your dad, alright?" She didn't even wait for my answer. I had no idea what was going on with her, but she wouldn't listen to any of my questions and basically stormed out the door. Mom wasn't back until the afternoon when the sun was slowly starting to set. It seems she had talked to my dad, however, because as soon as she was inside, they started preparing our home. They put locks on all windows and doors and put dark fabric over all our windows. "What is happening? Can you please talk to me?" I almost cried. I had never seen my parents this way. I felt like they were surely losing their minds. "Listen, Charlie, there is a reason we never celebrate this month in Dellen. It's because when we do, there is someone else joining us. Someone we never want to see," my father whispered. "It seems someone invited them to come back, honey. But don't worry, they'll be gone soon. That's all the information I got from my parents. I had no idea what was going on, but after everything was finished, they went back to being almost normal. They cooked dinner, we sat by the table and talked about school, work, and all the other boring subjects. Every time I tried to bring up the oddness, they shut me right down. After dinner, we watched a movie in the living room. It was already quite late, and I was just about to go to bed when the noises came back. A rattling just outside, the sound of sticks breaking on the ground, laughter. But this time, my parents heard it as well. Mom's eyes shot wide open. She held a finger to her lips, signaling me to be quiet. Even Dad seemed to be shaking. The noises came closer. This time, it couldn't possibly just be Miss Finley. I heard different people giggling. They almost sounded like children. The sound was now right behind our door. First, there was scratching, and then a loud knock, and another one, and another one. We stayed quiet and still, but it wouldn't stop. Somebody was knocking at the windows now. I wanted to believe that it was just a prank, but from the face of my mother, I could tell that it was something much worse. I don't know how much time had passed when the noises finally stopped, and I dared to speak again. "If you knew this would happen, why didn't we leave?" I asked. My mother had tears in her eyes when she answered, "Because we can't." When morning arrived and my parents finally removed the fabric from the windows, I couldn't believe what kind of stupidity they pulled me into last night. I was scared shitless at night, but now I couldn't understand what on earth they were thinking, and ultimately believed that my parents were actually the ones screwing with me. Maybe they wanted to teach me a lesson because they could tell how much I wanted to celebrate Halloween. I got even angrier when I realized what the noises outside had been coming from last night. As I looked through the window to the other side of the street, Miss Finley's house was unrecognizable. It was hauntingly beautiful and decorated just the way I saw it in movies. She had carved pumpkins all around, poisoned apples hanging in the trees, and spiderwebs stuck to the roof. There were gravestones on the lawn, and skulls assembled neatly all around the house. It must have taken her all night, though she seemed like she had some help, or at least that's what I assumed who the other voices were coming from. Though the creepiest part was the witch hanging from a rope on her porch. It was dressed in all black with a big hat and a broom. I put on my shoes, grabbed my coat, and walked outside. I had never seen any home in Dellen being decorated like this, and it wasn't even Halloween yet. More neighbors had assembled, and they were watching the spooky home of Miss Finley. As I got closer, I noticed that there was something sticky dripping from the witch's broom. It looked like blood. I slowly walked up the stairs to her porch, but instinctively took a step back when I realized that it didn't just look like blood. It was blood. And this witch wasn't holding a broom. The stick was pierced right through her head. Finally, the other neighbors and I made the last realization. This wasn't a decorative witch hanging from a rope. It was Miss Finley's dead body. Miss Finley's house was the first, but not the last one to be decorated in the spirit of Halloween. My mother was right. This was the year in which we needed to stay inside because we had welcomed something to our home that was ready to feast. In the town of Dellen, where it's always cozy and nice, we never celebrate Halloween. But I guess this year, it's different.